Weston National Park. Jessica, the floor is yours. Oh, okay. Okay, yeah. Oh, before, Jessica, come on up. You're up. At one point I wanted to recognize, I don't know if Steve Stock's still here, if he's, Steve Stock? I want to recognize Steve here. Steve's with the Guy Harvey Foundation, and we were going to be presenting the Rodney Barretto Award to Guy Harvey, but Steve came today, and Steve, we just want to recognize you and say thank you for everything the Guy Harvey Foundation does. Appreciate it.
And if I may, while Jessica's up here, I just wanted to welcome the team from the National Park Service and help kind of lead into Jessica's presentation. And I want to introduce the staff here. We've got, I'm going to start with Matt Johnson, PIO, Park Range Interpretation Specialist, Matt. D. Vanessa McDonough. There you are. Okay. She's the lead fisheries biologist for Biscayne National Park. Then we have Ben West, Chief of Planning from the Southwest region out of our Atlanta office. Ben's gotten very familiar with Florida. He's part of our family now. We have Sula Jacobs, Assistant Superintendent. Sula and I have done time in in Washington together.
Doing time in the program.
And then we have the superintendent, relatively new, Brian Carlstrom, and we are so pleased to have Brian down here, and he hit the ground running, and still running and running and running. So we wanted to welcome you guys. Commissioner, you know that we've been working hard on this issue for some time now, and what we're bringing to you today is a culmination of a lot of good hard work by staff, with the Park Service, with our team. John Hunt, Jessica, who am I leaving out on the team? Melissa Rex was a big part of the team. So we are a family now. So it was a long process, and we're feeling good about what we've been able to accomplish and the support from the Park Service. And so we look forward to getting into this issue. So thank you.
Okay, before I get started, you have some additional items in your book that I just want to point out in case you want to glance at these items while we're going through. You have a document that looks like this. That is the alternatives for the fishery management plan, a chart so that you could see these at a glance. You also have a chart that we've made. We have placed all these items in your book early this morning. Elves were busy placing these in your book. And so there's a chart that looks like this. On this chart, you can see state waters, current regulation state waters of the Atlantic, Everglades National Park regulations, Biscayne National Park current regulations, and Biscayne National Park proposed regulations under the fishery management plan. If you don't have a copy, raise your hand and we will get you a copy if you cannot find yours. We've also added to your booklet the last letter that we sent to Biscayne National Park that at the time was signed by Chairman Rodney Barretto. And you also have a copy of the MOU that we have with Biscayne National Park. Okay, our partnership with Biscayne National Park that Nick was talking about, it began in the early 2000s when the park recognized that the long-term success for fishery management within Biscayne National Park depended on a partnership with the FWC, the managing authority for the fishery resources for the state of Florida. FWC recognized that by partnering with the park, that the commission had the opportunity to influence the park's management philosophy and ensure the desires of FWC stakeholders were adequately represented throughout the process. So I'm going to be giving you a very lengthy presentation. If you have questions and want to stop me in the middle of the presentation, that's fine. If you want to wait to the end, that's fine. And I'll be asking for action today on the fishery management plan. So here's an outline of what I'm going to be presenting. First, I'll give you an overview of Biscayne National Park, cover the management plans and the history of FWC's involvement, a summary of the management measures under the fishery management plan, where we're asking for direction or action, and review of some recent developments and next steps.
Hey, Jessica, when you go through this, it would be great. Historical context for, we've got new commissioners. I mean, this has been an ongoing issue. I know our previous chairman was heavily involved, was up in Washington testifying on this issue. At the appropriate time, if you could sort of provide context of those types of things, that would be helpful.
Certainly. We're going to,
as a reminder to me.
Yes, certainly. We will go over all of those things, and that's why we're going to give you some additional background on the park in general this morning. So Biscayne National Park is located in highly developed southeast Florida within sight of downtown Miami, which is home to nearly 2.5 million residents. The park encompasses most of Biscayne Bay, and 95% of the park's 173,000 acres are covered by water, including coral reefs, sandy shoals, and a largely undeveloped mangrove shoreline. The waters of Biscayne National Park can be easily accessed from 4 nearby public boat ramps and marinas, where an average of 62,000 boats are launched annually. And Biscayne National Park hosts over 5,000 visitors per year, and there are many management and environmental challenges facing the park. Biscayne National Park was established in 1968 as a national monument. The park was established because it was recognized as a special place that housed a historically vibrant coral reef ecosystem that's basically an extension of the Keys coral reefs adjacent to a metropolitan area. When this monument was established, there was enabling legislation that stated that the waters of the park shall remain open to fishing in conformity with state laws, except that the Secretary of Interior could modify the regulations after consulting with the state. In 1980, the park was expanded to its current size and designated as a national park. And in these additional areas donated by the state of Florida, the FWC has full authority over fishing regulations in these added areas of the park. Orange hashed areas at the end sections of the park, that's where FWC is the final authority over fishing. So you can see we've got some jurisdiction issues in this park. The park is home to a variety of user groups who sometimes have competing interests in the park. The park waters are important for recreational and commercial fishing. The coral reefs and historical shipwrecks inside the park also draw large numbers of recreational divers, and other visitors enjoy boating, kayaking, hiking, and birding. The park is developing 2 separate management plans that are on 2 different timetables that will guide the park operations for years to come. The fishery management plan is nearly finalized and establishes a long-term plan to balance recreational and commercial fishing with protection of the park's fishery resources. It will ensure that fishing can continue as a sustainable activity, and the plan is intended to guide fisheries management decisions over the next 5 to 10 years, and has been being developed in part through a memorandum of understanding with the FWC, since we have a vested interest in how those resources are managed. The general management plan is not as far along as the fisheries management plan and is intended to establish an overall long-term management and zoning philosophy to address different levels of resource protection and visitor use throughout the park for the next 15 to 20 years. The park is currently operating under a general management plan that was implemented in 1983, and although there is no MOU with FWC, the park has continued to consult with us periodically on its development over the last 10 years. So first I'm going to cover the fishery management plan. First, a little history of the plan. The park began development of both plans in early 2000 and quickly decided it was in the best interest of the fishery resources inside the park to work collaboratively with the FWC. Due to the significant interest from the public, outlined work for cooperative fisheries management, and the general management plan was put on hold. Between 2002 and 2004, public comment occurred and a working group comprised of various fishing and environmental interests was formed to gather focused opinions and make recommendations. Between 2005 and 2012, FWC staff briefed the Commission multiple times on the status of the fishery management plan and some aspects of the proposed alternatives. That last briefing was in 2009. And during the last 10 years, the MOU was renewed in 2007 and again in 2012, and it will expire in September of 2014. In 2008, the agencies agreed on a preferred alternative for the fishery management plan, and a draft fishery management plan was released. And most recently in 2010, the Commission sent a letter to the park confirming the FWC's intent to initiate rulemaking for the preferred alternative in the fishery management plan following its approval. So as I mentioned before, both agencies realized that due to jurisdiction issues, that it was in the best interest of both agencies and the fisheries resources to work cooperatively on the fishery management plan through an MOU. The MOU acknowledged that more restrictive management measures may be necessary inside a national park than in other areas of the state. The MOU outlined the duties of each agency, and it also had points about how the agencies agree that properly regulated fishing will continue inside the park. It also emphasized have been tried and failed. So the FWC's opposition to no fishing zones has been a point of contention throughout the development of both the FMP and the GMP, and the Commission has insisted that this portion of the MOU be retained each time the MOU was renewed. After over 10 years of collaborative work between our two agencies, the park is ready to finalize the fishery management plan. But before this can happen, the park is seeking confirmation that the Commission concurs with the proposed management measures to achieving the fishery management plan goals. Pending Commission support for the plan, National Park Service expects to finalize the fishery management plan in 2014 and release a record of decision, after which FWC staff would begin developing draft rule proposals for public comment and Commission consideration. All regulatory changes proposed in support of the fishery management plan that requires FWC rulemaking would be carried out through the Commission's regular rulemaking process and are expected to include public work actions individually for adoption into FWC rule. So I'll now cover the most important aspects of the fishery management plan. The fishery management plan includes 5 alternatives that range from no action to very restrictive actions that are proposed to accomplish the park's goals for fishery resources. The preferred alternative is number 4 and was chosen through a collaborative effort between FWC and park staff. Many of the items recommended by the working group are reflected in this alternative, and the alternative focuses on conserving and rebuilding park fisheries and would require management changes to be implemented by the FWC. FWC staff has been operating under previous Commission direction that the National Park is a special place that deserves special attention and that the fishery resources in the park should be held to a higher conservation standard and managed for abundance. Thus, the goal of this preferred alternative is to increase the abundance and average size of targeted fish and invertebrate species within the park by 20% over the current conditions. As I mentioned, a suite of changes to FWC rules would be needed to achieve this goal. Here are the primary regulatory measures proposed under the preferred alternative framework. Once again, these are items that FWC staff in the park have identified that could be effective toward achieving the 20% goal. The alternative proposes to limit spearfishing in the park to a gear that lacks a trigger mechanism and prohibit the use of scuba or other air-providing equipment while spearfishing. These spearfishing regulations are less restrictive than other state parks and sanctuaries in Florida, which largely prohibit spearfishing altogether. The alternative also proposes to eliminate the 2-day recreational lobster sports season or mini season in the park in order to protect coral reef habitat from diver-related damage. Commercial fishing would slowly be phased out in the park via a special use permit issued by the park. This permit would be a use or lose permit issued to current fishers with a history of landings in the park and would be non-transferable. The permit would create a mechanism to phase out commercial fishing when the fishermen currently fishing in park waters leave the fishery. Trap-free zones could also be established near park headquarters at Convoy Point and in various coral reef protection areas that would prohibit traps on sensitive hard-bottom habitats. A no-trawl zone could be proposed within a portion of the bay. And finally, modifications to current bag limits, slot limits, and seasons for some species might be considered in order to achieve the goal of increasing abundance and average size of targeted fish and invertebrate species in the park by at least 20%. Almost all of these measures would require FWC rulemaking, and if you choose to implement any of these at a future meeting, they would help both agencies achieve the mutual goal of more abundant fishery resources in the park. Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a couple of questions?
Yes, Commissioner Priddy.
So these limitations or changes aren't necessarily automatically part of Alternative 4, that they are addressed later once the FMP is approved and implemented, and it would come back to us for rulemaking. For example, let's say the mini season.
Mm-hmm. So let me see if I can give you some examples. So these are part of the framework that's in the preferred alternative of the fishery management plan. So for example, some of the pieces like the no trawl zone within the bay, the particular area has not been identified specifically of where that no trawl zone would be. or exactly what the bag limits, slot limits, and seasons for the targeted fish species, those haven't been identified. So it's just a framework to accomplish the goal to get to that 20%. So the park is asking the commission to say, we agree with the fishery management plan and the goal of keeping the park to this higher standard. And then commission, it would be up to you to come back and look at all of these items individually. So when you guys started rulemaking, there would be additional public comment, FWC-led public workshops, and ultimately, based on what you guys hear in public comment, you might not be able to pass all of these items. Maybe you could only pass a handful of the items that are listed here, but that would still help the park try to achieve this 20% goal. So
really, is it more accurate to say what we're really being asked to approve is the goal?
and the concept, right, yes. And that you would agree that we would start regular rulemaking to look at these pieces and parts after the fishery management plan is approved, yes.
Okay, if that's the case, and we approve the concept, I guess I'm not really clear on why there are so many alternatives to choose from if within the concept of the 20% increase, we're able to adjust individual methods per our usual rulemaking process.
Yeah, I think that it's about all the various aspects that the park is trying to achieve overall. They have an overall goal. So different ones of these pieces and parts would help them in different ways. So some pieces and parts might help with habitat damage. Other pieces and parts might help because of a better visitor experience, because maybe, for example, near Convoy Point, where the headquarters is, it's a high traffic area, there's a lot of multiple user groups, and there's a lot of user conflicts. So all of these help the park in various ways towards this common goal. And that's part of the reason why there's so many listed here, is so that they can draw on a suite of options to get to that goal.
And it's also the federal law, the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, requires the park to have multiple alternatives, and that's so any environmental impact study that goes through, we're going to have these. You'd see this kind of a layout with multiple alternatives.
Right, and these are actually
and a no change alternative, I think, always carries.
Yeah, and this is all part of alternative 4. So if you look at this chart that we gave you, there are 5 total alternatives, and these are all the pieces just for alternative 4. So there's more restrictive alternatives that the park considered and less restrictive, including a status quo alternative that they considered as part of this NEPA process.
So we really should, if there's something that we don't like in this, we really shouldn't get hung up on it as far as which alternative we want to approve.
Or which one of these pieces and parts. But what you could do is, if you agree with the concept, but maybe there are a couple pieces and parts in here, if you agree to send a letter to the park that says that you want to move forward and you agree with the overall goal for the park's fishery resources, you could note concerns about some pieces that you see here on this slide, and you could continue to reiterate that we're going to go through our regular rulemaking process, as part of looking at all of these pieces and parts.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Freeman. Go ahead, Jessica.
Okay. So just as we were talking about, commission action is requested today to finalize the fishery management plan. Staff is recommending that you send a letter to the park reaffirming the FWC's concurrence with the management measures proposed under the fishery management plan preferred alternative 4, and confirming FWC's intent to proceed with its regular rulemaking process for the preferred alternative measures in order to achieve the fishery management plan goals. So I'm now going to go into the general management plan, and we'll come back to these same options on a staff recommendation slide. So into the general management plan. So as I mentioned earlier, the general management plan is on a different timetable than the fishery management plan. Remember that the general management plan is intended to create an overall management and zoning philosophy for the park. And remember that FWC staff have been working with the park on this plan, but there is no MOU in place yet for the general management plan. A draft of the general management plan was released in 2011. It also included a series of 5 alternatives ranging from status quo to most restrictive, and the park selected alternative 4 as their original preferred alternative. This alternative included a large no-fishing marine reserve and a series of pole and troll zones that limited fishing access in the park. And so that large marine reserve zone is here, this rectangular box here in purple. This is from the original preferred alternative 4. And this national park proposed preferred alternative proved to be very controversial during public review. Many members of the fishing public felt that this zoning scheme limited fishing access unnecessarily. So to review some of those reactions more in depth to the general management plan original preferred alternative, many stakeholders opposed the no fishing zone that was proposed. FWC also had significant concerns about the limitations on access, and FWC submitted a letter under the Coastal Zone Management Act formally opposing several aspects of the preferred alternative zoning scheme, including the no fishing zone. Stakeholder anger and frustration over the restrictive nature of some of the zones fueled concerns by local and national anglers about trends nationwide towards reducing access to fishing grounds. So on April 27, 2012, Chairman Wright testified at a congressional oversight hearing that was held in Washington, D.C. to discuss access to parks, and he testified about the importance of providing fishing access within Biscayne National Park. So following the release of the draft general management plan and the public concerns resulting from it, you directed staff to work with Biscayne National Park staff to develop new ideas and additional alternatives for the general management plan that did not include a no fishing zone. So FWC and Biscayne National Park staff met several times over the last 2 years to develop an alternative management scheme that allowed more fishing access and still met park goals. These collaborative meetings resulted in development of additional management alternatives that would implement a new and novel approach to resource management within the portion of the park that was set aside for a no fishing marine reserve under the original preferred alternative. Last Friday, the National Park Service released a supplemental draft of the general management plan that includes 2 additional alternatives and the selection of a new jointly developed preferred alternative between Biscayne National Park and FWC. The new alternatives create a special recreation zone, or an SRZ, designed to provide a unique experience for both recreational divers and recreational anglers by creating an area that will have larger and more fish and more closely resembles the historically vibrant reef system where divers and anglers are less likely to encounter other fishers. In order to provide this experience, fishing would be limited through the implementation of a program model after the quota hunt system that FWC uses to manage terrestrial systems. This system would provide unique fishing opportunities and would be unlike anything else in the nation in the marine environment. An intensive research and monitoring program would also be implemented in the SRZ over a 10-year period to test the effectiveness of the zone at meeting the National Park Service goals. So to go into the specifics of those new alternatives, and you'll see here on the map, if you remember that purple box, the purple box is now this blue box, blue rectangle, the special recreation zone. And FWC's primary motivation for working with the park to modify this original preferred alternative was to provide more fishing access to anglers. So these 2 new alternatives, 6 and 7, were developed that include more access, and some provisions that are common to both of these alternatives are that this previous no fishing zone has been converted to the SRZ, and since recreational angling will be allowed with some limitations throughout the new zone, the SRZ has been expanded in size by 40% relative to the size of the previous proposed closed marine reserve, closed to fishing, that was a little over 10,000 acres. By expanding the zone, it now incorporates the park's largest and most pristine stands of federally threatened staghorn and elkhorn coral, and it will spread the fishing effort over a larger area. FWC and Biscayne National Park staff are working together with NOAA Fisheries to develop a research and monitoring plan for the SRZ that would guide an adaptive management plan that will help ensure the regulations for the zone are appropriate to accomplishing park goals for the area. So continuing with concepts that are common to both the alternatives, both alternatives contain a series of management measures aimed at creating this special place with more high-quality coral reef habitat, more and larger fish, and where divers and anglers are less likely to encounter other fishermen. So under both 6 and 7, an effort would be made to actively remove existing marine debris from the SRZ at the onset of its implementation. Anchoring would be prohibited throughout the zone, with the park installing additional mooring buoys over time to create better recreational access. All grouper harvest would be prohibited in the SRZ due to the fact that underwater visual surveys conducted as part of a multi-agency, including FWC, monitoring project indicate that the number of legal-sized groupers in the SRZ is extremely low. The only allowable fishing gear within the SRZ would be hook and line, with 2 exceptions. Removal of lionfish would be allowed with a limited number of authorized gears, and the commercial ballyhoo fishery that is permitted by the FWC to fish with lamprey nets would be allowed to fish in this new zone. So Biscayne National Park, in collaboration with FWC, has selected alternative 6 as the new preferred alternative. Some additional components of alternative 6 include management measures implemented through FWC and federal rulemaking to implement this quota hunt concept. The new and novel quota hunt approach would be used for management of ecologically important marine habitats. The SRZ would be open to fishing year-round to a limited number of anglers for this very unique fishing opportunity. Permits to fish in the area would be issued by FWC as a special activity license and would be awarded through the current licensed vendor via a random draw. The number of SALs to be awarded would be based on the estimated abundance of snappers in the SRZ area, as determined by this visual survey that I just mentioned. The numbers of SALs would be set such that no more than half of the estimated number of legal-sized snappers would be removed from the SRZ during any given year. Based on these calculations, the initial number of SALs would not exceed 500 annually, with a maximum of 430 being issued to private anglers and no more than 70 issued to professional fishing guides. Anglers fishing in the zone would be required to submit a monthly logbook of their fishing activity, and FWC would partner with Biscayne National Park on research, monitoring, and rulemaking. In addition to the preferred alternative number 6, Biscayne National Park also developed a second new alternative, alternative 7, as part of this supplement to the draft general management plan to give stakeholders more than one alternative for consideration. The specifics of alternative 7 include open access fishing for October through May, and then complete closure of the SRZ to fishing during the summer months of June to September. And if the park chooses to implement alternative 7, FWC would not be further involved in the process, and Biscayne National Park would conduct all aspects of research, monitoring, and rulemaking on their own. The new and novel management approach incorporating the quota hunt concept is not part of this alternative, and staff does not recommend alternative 7. So what are the next steps for the general management plan? As I mentioned, the added alternatives were released last Friday, and the public comment period is now open. The public comment period will remain open for 90 days through February 14th, with 3 public meetings planned at various locations in Southeast Florida the week of December 9th. Pending the review of public comments, the park is tentatively planning on finalizing the GMP in 2014, with the SRZ being fully implemented by January 2016. Should the park adopt alternative 6, MOUs with FWC would be developed, and staff would plan to initiate FWC rulemaking to implement the SAL program and other regulatory aspects of the SRZ in 2015. Once the SRZ is in place, an adaptive management approach would be implemented using the information gathered from the logbook program and Biscayne National Park creel surveys to evaluate whether or not the assumptions about the harvest rates used to determine how many SALs to issue were appropriate. These and other assumptions would be evaluated according to the monitoring program, and they would do this at 3, 5, and 8 years. If Biscayne National Park and FWC staff find that the harvest rates in the SRZ are exceeding expectations, the number of SALs issued to fish in the zone could be adjusted. After 10 years, the park intends to use the information gathered by the research and monitoring plan to determine whether the goals of a more complete, more historically vibrant reef ecosystem have been achieved. And at this time, the park will reconsider whether or not a no-fishing marine reserve zone is required to meet their goals. So, commission action is requested today to finalize the fishery management plan. Staff is recommending you send a letter to the park reaffirming FWC's concurrence with the management measures proposed under the fishery management plan, which is preferred alternative number 4, and confirming FWC's intent to proceed with its rulemaking process to implement measures of the preferred alternative following the park finalizing the fishery management plan. With respect to the general management plan, staff recommends the commission direct FWC staff to continue to work with Biscayne National Park, attend the public meetings planned for the week of December 9th, and provide the commission with updates as needed at future commission meetings. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Jessica. Commissioners, before we get to public comment, do any of the commissioners have questions for Jessica? While we're up here, Commissioner Pretty.
Why can't we adopt option or alternative 6 for the fishery management plan?
That's a good question. The fishery management plan is looking at how fishery regulations can be consistent throughout the whole park. And the general management plan is more of a plan for overall zoning of the park that would include pole and troll areas. And so I think that the two plans are working together. The fishery management plan is a subset of the general management plan. And the general management plan that includes that special area is really part of their overall zoning scheme, and it's really to protect habitat. The goal is not necessarily fishery protection, that's kind of a sub-goal. Their main goal is protecting those stands of threatened and endangered coral species. So it's kind of all one piece. One's a subset of the other one.
We're back to federal stuff, right? Try to make sense of it all. Mr. Chairman. Yes, Commissioner Rivera.
Question, just some frame of reference, if you could provide that. And I understand it's an estimate now, the number of these permits that would be issued, but it's not like it was rough, you know, based on the analysis now, might be 500. How many people do we think fish in that area now?
That's a good question. We don't know
Thank you.
specific to that. We don't know specific to that particular part of the park. We do have Biscayne National Park creel surveys that look at overall effort throughout the entire park. So that's kind of a guess, and that's why we looked at what if the people fishing in that area removed half of the legal size snapper that would be there. And that's also why we would come back and look at that number at the latest within 3 years of implementing this program, because maybe we're too far off, or maybe we've way overestimated the permits, or maybe we've way underestimated the permits.
Yeah, I'm kind of coming at it more from, I think it's, you know, I agree with the concept of trying to not have closed areas and allow, you know, fit more fishing, or at least allow fishing. But if it's a huge number now and we're going to 500, then that may not be as good as it seems like it, you know, sounds like at first blush. And so, anyway, I mean, I understand if you don't have the number now, but as we proceed, you know, this process, I think that'd be something to try to really hone in on, so I understand how many people are fishing there now that wouldn't be allowed to fish.
Sure.
And Jessica, we do have, I mean, kind of like with the fisheries management plan, there's rulemaking required, there are off ramps, I guess, if there are issues as we have to bring this online. Is that correct?
Yes, rulemaking would be required as part of the fishery management plan.
Okay. But not with the GMP?
Yes, with the GMP also to implement this quota hunt type approach, since FWC would be issuing the permits to fish in that area.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
just one more question. So, and you touched on this, but it was the compromise in coming up with, I guess it was alternative 6, and the size of that, essentially, in trading, we don't want to have no fish zones or closed zones, so instead we're going to have a larger area with limited fishing versus a smaller area with no fishing.
Yeah, that's also a good question. So, we looked at increasing the size of the zone because that would spread out the fishing more, and also the size of the box was increased a little bit further south because that's where some of those federally protected corals are, some very large stands of those corals. So if we're going to try to protect the habitat and we need to spread out the fishing even more, that's why it was increased a little bit. It's still completely within the monument, the part where the park has the final authority. It does not go into the areas where FWC has the final authority.
Go ahead, if I may. One of the things we consider too, working with the Park Services, we want this to succeed. We want this approach to be successful and be a good model. And we felt like the staff all looked at this and the original footprint, we felt like we needed to look at a bigger scale to make sure we got all the elements in that would help us be successful and get all the ecological elements that we would influence with this limit. So I think that was one of the main reasons.
I have another question.
Yeah, Commissioner Critter.
So in the alternative 6, if we were to issue the permits to those 500 people, so they have that for the entire year.
Mm-hmm.
And we would do that. Are we compensated in some way for administering that program for the park?
Yes, the special activity license already has a $25 fee. We already issue marine special activity license for all sorts of activities that maybe a university needs to do some research or other activities like broodstock collection for a hatchery. So this would be another type of research SAL, and there's already a $25 fee associated with those SALs.
Okay, and going back to the FMP regarding commercial fishing, how many commercial fishermen fish in that area now?
We looked at some numbers over the last 5 years, and there were anywhere from 77 to around 95 fishers in any one year over the last 5 years. And there's multiple types of commercial fisheries operating in the park.
I'm asking about the ones that would be the phased out type of commercial fishing.
And those particular fisheries would be the live bait shrimp, the dead food shrimp. There's also stone crabbing in the park, some commercial lobstering in the park, bait fishing in the park. So those would be the main fisheries that would be phased out over time. The live bait shrimp is the most valuable fishery in Biscayne National Park.
Go ahead, Commissioner Bergeron.
Yeah, I have a question. You got a map that shows where the park has control versus the FWC has control. So I can see the total area, and I want to make sure I understand everything.
Let me back
Yeah,
up
I
to
got
that.
a few questions.
Okay. There's the map.
Okay. So as we've been working with the Park Service, you're talking about a area within the park where the park has authority to have this special fishing
Yes.
with a quota of 500.
Yes, that area, if you look at the monument, the area where that would occur is in this area right here. And it the bottom boundary of that new zone stops right here at the line between the Parks Authority and FWC Authority. And also there's a channel right there, so that's another reason why we were working together to kind of end that area right here. That way boats can come out through the channel and then just take a hard left and they're in that new zone.
Yeah, so this management plan doesn't put any restrictions on the area that the FWC has authority?
In the general management plan, no, but in the fishery management plan, yes. So the fishery management plan, in this partnership through the MOU, what the ultimate goal was to try to regulate the fishery resources the same throughout the park, so that the regulations wouldn't be different necessarily in the monument than they were in the area where the FWC has the authority. So the general concept of that fishery management plan was to have the same or uniform regulations throughout the park.
So you're saying that where the FWC has authority, that we're gonna have different regulation than we have outside of the park?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Even where the FWC has authority?
Yes, that is part of the proposal for the fishery management plan. And you guys would go through regular rulemaking to consider these additional changes for the park. And if you're wondering what those are, there's a chart that we gave you. So the first column is what's in state waters outside the park in the Atlantic right now. Then we've also compared it to Everglades National Park. And then there are currently more restrictive regulations in Biscayne National Park that FWC has put in place already. So that's on this chart already. So for example, there's no marine life fishing for the aquarium trade commercially in the park already. So there's already additional restrictions that FWC's put in place throughout the park. And then the fishery management plan, we would be asking you guys to consider even more additional regulations to help the park meet their goals.
Well, okay, so where FWC has authority, we have different regulations outside the park, even where we have authority.
Yes,
Okay, and then where the park has authority, we have some flexibility on an area that we can authorize 500 permits.
yes.
Well, the whole key here, obviously, our goal and our mission has always been for preservation with sustainable and access for the public.
Mhm.
So I would want to make sure outside where FWC has authority that the regulations we put there really consider preservation of the resource for longevity. But make sure that we have sustainable access and enjoyment for the people of Florida.
Yes.
And that would be the way I feel about it.
And just to put some geographic context on, correct me if I'm wrong on these numbers, this SRV area, Jessica, about 14,000 acres. The park itself, about 170,000 acres, so we're talking less than 10% of the park
Right.
is going to be under this quota system.
Correct.
Okay, great. Commissioners, I was going to invite Superintendent Carlstrom to come here. He's the fairly new superintendent of the park. Came down from the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal Park up in the Washington, D.C. area, and you've been on the job about six months?
Since March, yeah.
Since March? Okay.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me up. I'd like to applaud the cooperation that Nick has extended to the park and the really excellent effort we've had working with staff, Jessica, Melissa, John, and others that I know have helped contribute to this. They did an excellent job of explaining two highly complex, with a lot of history behind the plans that the park is in the midst of trying to develop. The fisheries management plan and the general management plan. Those are two pieces of critical planning guidance that the park needs in order to continue preserving the park that's a special place within the state of Florida and within the country that you guys can greatly influence. We really appreciate the effort that the staff has put forward and how the plans have come together.
Thank you. Hey, Commissioners, anyone? Any questions for the superintendent?
We appreciate your effort.
You're welcome.
Working with the state of Florida, together for preservation of these, natural resources, but have flexibility, reasonable flexibility for, sustainable access and enjoyment and recreation. It's always been the goal of the FWC to put preservation number one and manage these resources for longevity for the benefit of people.
And it's very consistent with the Park Service.
Right, and have a great partnership with the Park Service, but to make sure we both reach our goals, and that's the important thing, that we don't squeeze people out, fence everybody out of these public lands, but manage it to where we can protect it and enjoy it. And then we get 2 for 1. So I hope our staff can work with the Park Service and we reach our mission and goal and help you reach your mission and goal, because we all represent the people of Florida and various interests. From environmentalists to conservationists to fishermen, commercial, recreation, charter boaters, all ties in. So I hope we can come up with something that reaches all of our goals as we proceed forward. And once I hear from all the stakeholders, which I like to listen to.
I'd like to add 2 things. The comment period for the general management plan is open through February 20th. And the 3 public meetings are going to be December 9th, 10th, and 11th in Miami, actually, Coral Gables, Florida City, and down in Key Largo.
Great. Thank you.
And I want to thank you, because I've heard good things about working with our staff. And in the past, we've had some real difficulties reaching our goal when we're dealing with the Park Service. So
there's a new sheriff in town.
Thank you. It takes a coordinated effort to manage these resources. It's a real challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Stay close. We may have questions for you later on after public comment.
We'll be here.
Okay, thank you. Before we move to public comment, I'm going to have our executive director clarify an issue that's actually fairly important and probably in a good way. This clarification will go.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. We mentioned, we talked through, but the idea of a fee for the special activity license, we've talked about that. We don't believe a state fee would be necessary in that regard. We don't want to add any other cost to fishing opportunities in this area. So we believe we can administer that without charging an additional fee.
So we're already cutting fees and taxes today. Vice Chair Pretty, I'm going to call the speakers up.
Yes, and as usual, I'm going to call the first 3, and if the first person could come to the podium and the other 2 take a seat on the front row, that way we can move through a little faster. The first 3 speakers are Drew Martin, Bonnie Basham, and Norman Duncan. So Bonnie, you're up.
Thank you, Bonnie Basham, representing Boat US, and just a word of thank you, Commissioner Bergeron, for an absolutely marvelous evening. Perfect. Boat US has followed this issue for as long as it's been around. We've been very concerned, and we still have a few concerns. I think Jerry Sansom offered one of them yesterday, which is please, please, please do not give up any of your management authority to the service. I'm glad to hear that you are having public hearings, but my question is, based on the recommendations and the vote today, would you be placing yourself in a position where if the public hearings came back pretty radically different with respect to access or number of boarding buoys or those, could you change those pieces of the agreement? Or are you locked into what you're gonna, approve today?
I mean, my understanding is we could vote on the rules and go, agree not to go forward with certain pieces of this, as we heard from the public.
So you could make those amendments within the.
That's my understanding, unless Jessica tells me different. But,
I hope so.
yeah, she's nodding her head, so that was what I was told.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mentioned a couple of the two issues, the mooring buoys, the number of them, the number of permits, and continued access to the park. We just have concerns with the parks portion. And I appreciate that you're having the public hearings. We will get our members out to share their thoughts with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
I should have asked for Drew to go first. I apologize. So Drew Martin is up next.
I don't think he's here.
So I didn't make a
You
mistake.
didn't make it.
I'll retract
You're
that.
good. We're all new at our jobs here this morning.
Okay, our next speaker is Norman Duncan, and then if the next three could come up, and that would be Aaron Adams, Patrick Lynch, and Bill Kelly. Mr. Duncan.
Commissioners. I would like to speak today in the spirit and hopefully with the vision of Congressman John Saylor, who's the father of this park. Also, people like Lloyd Miller, who helped establish this park to preserve for the future generations. Many critics bemoan the steady increase in laws and regulations on their outdoor activities and initially blame regulators, while the true causes of the decline in fisheries is a general degradation of the environment due to factors such as large increase in human populations, uncontrolled development, with the resulting habitat losses, invasion of alien species, which may dominate these ecosystems. Meanwhile, government agencies, sport fishermen, are specific high-profile groups that can be focused on and attacked by short-sighted economic and political interests. The dwindling fish sizes and stocks are a direct result of more people usage, development, and the do-nothing alternatives are not working. Obviously not working. I urge you to help establish no fishing protected zones that would balance the commercial activities in the park. If commercial fisheries are allowed to in Biscayne National Park, it needs to be balanced with marine reserve zones closed to fishing and attempt to preserve these ecosystems. The establishment of fully protected marine reserves is the future of this type of management. This is one of the few management tools available to combat the exploitation of these areas. There are separate regulatory zones in Biscayne National Park, as we've discussed, that fall under the authority of the state and/or the park. This is confusing, and these overlapping regulatory areas should be consolidated. The scope of the management goals of the state and federal authorities are very different. The alternate 4 is a step in the right direction, but the step is not big enough. In the long run, this will become apparent. The trends toward more restrictions to accessing fishing grounds seem to go hand in hand with dwindling fish stocks. I can take any questions. I can speak longer, but that's all I scribbled down.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Appreciate your time.
I urge you to consider no fish zones. If that's not done, our fish stocks and ecosystems are going to continue to dwindle. Thank you.
Next up is Aaron Adams.
Good morning, Commissioners. Once again, a little bit different setup than I'm used to this morning. For the record, I'm Aaron Adams. I'm the Director of Operations for Bone Fishing Tarpon Trust. The take-home message is that BTT is in support of the Commission signing on to the concept of the General Management Plan and the Fisheries Management Plan. It's clear that a combination of spatial zoning and management of catch and effort are needed, not just in the park, but in general. And more management agencies are moving to that type of approach. However, the effectiveness of any management approach is dependent on the information on which decisions are based, and you all are very aware of that. As you likely know, based on previous times I've had up here, BTT has worked with guides and anglers in the Florida Keys and Florida Bay to develop fishing area maps, work with FWC to develop habitat maps for those areas. And that information has proven very valuable in both the Florida Keys National Sanctuary process and with Everglades National Park. The former proactively and the second reactively. So Bonefish Tarpon Trust is offering our support and help in that type of effort for Biscayne National Park. So that questions of how many fishermen are there, where they are fishing, and the habitats that they are using are actually addressed. And that, based on our experience in the Keys and Florida Bay, that would eliminate a large portion of the opposition and arguments, disputes. It's also important to note that anglers and guides that fish the flats are very aware of the need for conservation and very supportive, as long as it's done in a science-based fashion. You're realizing, of course, that the flats fishery is primarily catch and release. That ethos is well established. So there's a lot of different zones type of approaches that can be used. The guides are generally supported with log books and other types of information, but it has to be interactive. It can't be a one-way street. So the plans for getting information from fishermen is excellent, but we also have to provide results of that information back to them so that it's an iterative process. And finally, and it's great to see it in the presentation, but it's extremely important that we partition the fisheries. Not all fisheries are the same as far as the areas they use, the gear they use, the harvest, the effort, etc. And I think that would also make the situation much easier. But in general, the concept is very good, and we think it should move forward.
Right. Thank you, Aaron. We really do appreciate your offer of assistance here. We are going to take you up on that offer for sure, and this will be a good public-private partnership. So thank you.
Okay, next is Patrick Lynch. The next three after Patrick would be Bill Kelly, Caroline McLaughlin, and Trip Hoffman.
Hi, my name is Patrick Lynch. I am here to represent the Valley commercial Valley fishery. As I understand it, the recommendation is to allow us to continue to fish, and then I would hope that you would vote with that. And I wanted to just reiterate that how we have a very clean fishery. It's a surface skimming net. The worst thing that we could ever do would be touch the bottom. It would tear the gear, and it ruins our net, which is very expensive. And it, you know, the fish is a migratory fish. They come, they go. We don't touch the bottom. Even the Keys allows us to fish in the spas because it's just very clean. We have almost no bycatch, and we hope that you would vote that way.
Thank you.
Bill?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, a pleasure. I'm really perplexed looking at these alternatives, with the exception of number 1 and number 2. We see a progression and a noose tightening around the commercial fishing industry, all for the intent of having bigger fish in one of the most utilized water parks in America, abutting one of the largest metropolises in this country. We've been addressing similar issues in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary under their general management review, and we think there needs to be additional focus on water quality, education, and law enforcement. Just 5 or 6 weeks ago, Miami's infrastructure dumped 250,000 gallons of raw sewage into Biscayne Bay. That happened 3 years ago. They
each and every day are dumping millions of gallons of only marginally treated wastewater into our ocean. If we want to see more and bigger fish in Biscayne Bay, I think we need to clean up the water, and maybe we would see that. You know, let's take key indicator species in that area. Stock assessments on black grouper, yellowtail snapper, mutton snapper, all conducted within the last 3 years show that those stocks are in good to excellent shape. So we're wondering why we need to have these particular closures. In December of 2011, National Marine Fisheries Service and NOAA instituted annual catch limits that got Eric Schwab in January of the following year to declare an end to overfishing. It doesn't exist anymore in the United States on all 528 managed species under these new rules. Why we're targeting the spiny lobster fishery, I don't know. Based on the external recruitment and genetic studies, all of our lobster come from someplace else. So each and every year we get a whole new stock here. Bigger lobsters, they're mobile animals, very social, they move around, and so it's a good chance that in another 6 months or so, no matter how big that reserve is, that they're going to get caught, and that's fine because that's how we feed America's consumers. We can't continue to keep putting these restrictions on the commercial fishing industry and at the same time importing more than 80% of the fish products that are consumed in the United States. We have the most conscientious and safest seafood products in the world, and we need to make that available to the American consumer. I'm also very much concerned about this. We're banning trapping up there or proposing that. We've been under a FWC trap reduction program for a number of years. We've almost reduced the number of traps by half. Our commitment to the environment is substantial. Just a year and a half ago, we worked with the Gulf and South Atlantic Councils, established 60 new coral protection sites to protect the crop roots and other species of corals. And we can do that same thing working with Biscayne National Park. But this closure mentality has got to stop. There are other ways that we can address these issues, address the environment, provide a safe product for America's consumers, and at the same time allow regulated recreational fishing and diving in these areas. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Caroline McLaughlin.
Good morning. I'm Caroline McLaughlin, representing the National Parks Conservation Association. I just wanted to raise a number of concerns that the NPCA has in regards to the supplemental draft general management plan of Biscayne National Park. We're concerned specifically about the special recreation zone and the new preferred alternative. We think that it's inadequate to protect the coral reef ecosystem within the park. And our main concern is mostly that the resource will continue to be depleted under this new preferred alternative, albeit at a slower rate and no action. I think we really need to be focusing on strategies related to preservation and replenishment if we want to move forward and see healthy, abundant resources in 10, 20, or 50 years, rather than accepting continued depletion of vital park resources. This is also an issue of equity or different users and different types of user experiences. I think recreational fishing absolutely has a place within the park, but we also need to be considerate of the needs of different types of users, specifically divers and snorkelers, to experience a coral reef ecosystem that is not impacted by extractive uses. Also, a few concerns about the adaptive management strategies that are a key component of the new preferred alternative. I think we need to see clearer management objectives. We need to know what the benchmarks will be and how we will determine whether or not this new alternative is actually meeting these objectives. And also, this point has been raised a number of times today, that the general management plan should be focused on overall habitat and ecosystem protection. And we are concerned that using indicators from snappers, solely snapper, to manage the entire ecosystem and to determine the number of permits based only on one species is not necessarily a good strategy for ecosystem management and protection. So overall, we don't feel that the new alternative better meets the park's management goals and objectives. And we feel that alternative 4 is still the better alternative. And I think in order to achieve the common goals of resource protection and providing different types of users with valuable experiences, I think we need to focus on the most efficient, effective, and science-based way of achieving these goals, which we believe to be the Marine Reserve. Thank you.
Caroline, who did you say you were with? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
The National Parks Conservation Association.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and next we have Trip Altman, and he'll be followed by, who was our first speaker that wasn't available at the time, Drew Martin, and lastly, Mike Leonard. Trip?
Good morning, Commissioners. Trip Hockman, representing CCA Florida. While CCA does not have an official position right now, we will be developing one this week. This weekend, we have been in touch with staff. Our concerns mimic the same as Commissioner Rivard's and Commissioner Bergeron's. We are concerned about access, the number of permits, the number of mooring buoys there. If you have so many permits, is there going to be enough mooring buoys? Are they going to remove mooring buoys? Or are they going to add enough to be adequate enough to have everybody there and fishing, diving, snorkeling, doing whatever? We also are concerned about transient issues. Will you be able to, with stored gear, will you be able to come through the area with pole spears and stuff like that for the divers and other issues? But CCA will continue to work with staff on this issue. Thanks.
Okay, Drew Martin. And Mike Leonard, if you could make sure that you're up front, please.
Drew Martin, I'm here on behalf of the Sierra Club. Thank you for taking me out of order. Once again, got lost finding the Bonaventura Hotel. The Sierra Club, I've attended many of these reef meetings, and I talked to someone from Australia, and they were actually a commercial fisherman. They were originally opposed to the idea of marine reserve, and then they did it. And he said, you know, there was so much additional fishing available right along the reserve because you now had an area where the fish could replenish themselves. And I think a lot of times people look at this from a very short-term approach, which is it's going to affect me in the next year or so, but they don't look at what the long-term resource is. Now, Florida is a tourist-based economy, and people come here to see our resources, and the reef system brings a huge value to Florida. I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars. And the reef system is just being hammered right now. And one of the problems is if you don't have any areas where you have limited fishing, you get a lot of problems with fishing tackle, fishing gear, people anchoring on the reefs. And so you need to have some areas where the fish can get a break. Now, I support the statements by NPCA. They've researched this. I think people should not be afraid of this concept of a marine reserve, an alternative for. It's an opportunity for the fish to establish themselves. And I know that I've talked to some of the recreational fishermen and also even people that are in the business of recreational fishing guides, and they say that this area is really being depleted. It's really suffering. And the thing is, people take oftentimes the wrong fish accidentally. One of the big problems is people have taken a lot of the parrotfish off the reefs. The parrotfish maintain the ability of the reefs to stay healthy. So I think we have to look at the long-term impacts and not focus so much on the short-term impacts. I know that people may lose an opportunity to fish in a particular area that they're very favorable to fishing in, but if the long-term resource is destroyed, those people in the long run are going to be the ones who suffer. The people who most enjoy going out there fishing, if there's no fish to catch, they're the ones that are going to experience the most disappointment because they're going to go out there and there's not going to be any fish. Unfortunately, fishing gear gets lost. We get a lot of this ghost fishing going on, and that's one of the problems. So again, we support the NPCA recommendations. We think Alternative 4 is an opportunity to protect this resource, and then we can reopen it up once it's been protected. Thank you.
Okay, and I have as the final speaker, Mike Leonard.
Good morning. Again, I'm Mike Leonard. I'm with the American Sport Fishing Association. We are the Sport Fishing Industry Trade Association. We are based just outside of Washington, D.C. in Alexandria, Virginia. So we are the National Trade Association for the recreational fishing industry. So our members are folks who make, sell, distribute fishing equipment. We have some outdoor retail members, as well as some state agencies like the FWC. In fact, Director Wiley sits on our board, and we spend an awful lot of time in Florida. We have more members in the state of Florida than in any other state. We spend a lot of time here. Our trade show, ICAST, was in Orlando, I think, 2 of the last 4 years, and will be the next 3 years. We just had our annual membership meeting in Sanibel last month. So we try not to play favorites, but we really like Florida. And a lot of that has to do with the great relationship we have with the FWC and the great work the FWC does in looking out for the interests of recreational fishermen and the industry. As we approach the Biscayne National Park issue, our primary concern was with the Marine Reserve that we viewed as being overly restrictive and leaping past other less restrictive options that could still sustain the park's resources while allowing public access, and we were concerned with the terrible precedent that it would set, whereby a region was closed to recreational fishing, claimed to be for reasons other than fisheries management, but to us it sounded an awful lot like fisheries management, therefore the FWC needed to be involved in that process. So we are very glad to see the great work that's come over the last year plus between the FWC and the Park Service in figuring out other alternatives besides that Marine Reserve. And generally are supportive of the concepts in this special recreation area that's come out of those discussions. There are, of course, some important issues that need to be ironed out with this area as we move forward. Some that come to mind include the need to ensure we have robust use of these permits in this area. It was mentioned earlier, is 500 the right number? Do we need to look further to see if that's meeting the demand while ensuring we're still meeting our conservation goals? There certainly, in our mind, needs to be a use it or lose it mechanism to ensure that folks aren't getting a hold of these permits and then just sitting on them and prohibiting fishing access. And we'd also like to see some consideration of allowing maybe temporary permits to allow for out-of-staters or out-of-towners to still be able to enjoy the park's resources. Another area is to ensure we have reasonable and achievable management goals of this area so that we're not setting ourselves up for failure and 10 years down the road defaulting back to a Marine Reserve because we didn't put in place goals that were actually possible to achieve. And then finally, ensuring that there is a swift addition of mooring buoys. We have concern over lack of access in this area if there is no anchoring, so we need to ensure that in order to reduce user conflicts and ensure that we're meeting the demand of users, that we have a sufficient number of mooring buoys. So again, these are important details to iron out, but I certainly don't want us to lose sight of the big picture here, and that having an area that is open to recreational fishing, although limited to some extent, sure beats an area that's completely closed to recreational fishing. So let's figure out those important details. ASA and others in the recreational fishing community certainly stand willing to help hash that out. But again, the big picture is certainly much better where we are now than where we were a few years ago. So thanks to the FWC and the Park Service for all the great work in getting us to this point, and let's continue to move forward in a positive path. So thank you.
Thank you.
And that's all the speakers I had.
All the speakers, great. Commissioners, we have staff recommendation before us to get in a proper posture to discuss. If we want to discuss this, I would be willing to entertain a motion. Or not.
So we're going to have discussion after.
We'll have discussion. Chairman, Commissioner Berger?
Well,
maybe we'll discuss that. We'll discuss.
this is a mighty big subject.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, I hope as we proceed forward, when will this come in front of us for a final decision? Are we moving to a final decision?
No, this is almost the first step.
Okay.
Of decision.
Give me a little.
Let Jessica walk you through kind of what we're asking for today. You've got some options as regarding which way you go.
So we were asking for a final decision on the overall goal of the fishery management plan, but the pieces and parts of that goal we would bring back to you at a later date for rulemaking. That's one option. Another thing that we could do is we could slow this process down a little bit, and the FWC, we could actually go out and hold additional public workshops, since the last public workshops that were held on the fishery management plan were in 2009. The workshops that the superintendent was talking about Those are workshops specific to the general management plan that the park is holding. So we could hold some public workshops, we could let the park hold the workshops on the general management plan, and then we could come back to you with the results of those workshops and ask you these questions again about what you think about the aspects of the fishery management plan. That we have some wiggle room here. We got multiple options here.
Okay. Have we had any workshops with our stakeholders?
Those workshops, there were 2 or 3 rounds of workshops, but they were many years ago. So the workshops on the fishery management plan were in 2002, 2003, and 2009. And those were park-sponsored workshops where FWC staff was present. FWC staff has not held specific workshops all by ourselves on these issues yet. But we could.
But isn't it true that we will have workshops when we get to the point of the more specific
Rulemaking will be normal rulemaking,
that we
which
want to
with
do?
everything.
Exactly. But if you were looking for some additional information before you felt comfortable making a decision about the overall goal of the fishery management plan, we could go hold some workshops now and come back with some input on some of those ideas that are in that fishery management plan preferred alternative and report back, and that would give us something to move forward with before we have those rulemaking workshops. It would be kind of a precursor.
Commissioner Rivard?
Yeah, thank you. So if I understand it correctly, there was an MOU that was entered into in 2002, and then it was renewed in 2007. And so we are currently operating under an MOU that will expire a little less than a year from now, in October of 2014.
Yes.
So that is the context that we're doing all this in. That, I mean, that to the extent that there's a deadline pushing all this, the MOU, the existing MOU is going to expire next October. And so whether we take action today, and I've noticed in all the documents, and I think it's, as you know, a new commissioner, it's helpful for me to understand a little more of the context. But at every opportunity, you know, you guys are saying that you're asking, the staff is asking that the commission consider reaffirming, not taking a position, but essentially reaffirming the position that has been taken in years past leading up to this, and that we haven't changed our mind in essence, that we're agreeing with the objectives of the park. And so, but anyway, I just want to make sure I understand all that correctly, so that whether we take action today or we don't, we're working towards a deadline of next October to do whatever we're going to do so that that MOU doesn't expire without something else in place.
That's correct. All those things are correct.
Yeah, I mean, to put this into context, I mean, this is I'm looking at this is just continuing the march that we've been doing. Sort of the relevant thing here, I think that's important, is again, for years we've been hearing about these marine reserves and no fishing zones, and the overwhelming preference of the commission in the past, and I know commissioners have changed, is not to have these no fishing zones, not to shut down access completely. And so between prior chairs and our executive directors, there's been a lot of blood left on the floor on that issue, where we've prevailed so that we have access preserved in there, and trying to strike that balance of access and sustainability versus no access whatsoever.
Right. That's under the general
That's
management plan, where they're going through this CIS process, and just in reading that abstract, it was all interesting to me. You know, if you look at the historical context of it, and you know, to see that those battles have been fought, and that there is an innovative way of trying to reach a compromise between the federal government and the state being responsive to the concerns of previous commissions. And so, I mean, just that one-page abstract that shows that there's been a lot of work done to get us to this point. But again, so I understand that's the general management plan and not the fishery management plan. And I understand they go in concert to some degree, but
they go together, and again, those elements of the fishery management plan come back to us for more granular discussion to, you know, all the concerns that have been raised here. So, I want to recognize the executive director real quick. He wanted.
Thank you. If I may, it kind of help bring it. What we would really, staff would really, our preferred approach would be if the commission could get comfortable endorsing, reaffirming the fishery management.
Our stakeholders, you know, for the benefit of the environment too. And, you know, that's always important. One question I want to ask is, the area that the FWC has authority, you have regulations that are greater than what's outside of the boundary. Are those regulations changing in this management plan? Are they increasing
Yes.
more than what they are today where the FWC has authority?
Yes, we would be bringing back those details for you to look at in the future as part of a package, and we would be gathering more public comment on that, yes.
Oh, okay, okay. And,
And again, in terms of fishing access, as I understand it, Jessica, check me here. But again, but for an area that's less than 10% of the park, fishing access will remain open. So this plan essentially preserves 92, 93% of the park fishing access, and the other 8% there's fishing access just with the quota system, right?
right.
And again, to be clear, that's under the general management plan. We're not asking for you to necessarily approve that, endorse that today, unless you want to. That's the process of moving forward. But the fishery management plan is more overall goals of improving the fishery by 20% and all the measures that might come under that umbrella. But any regulatory or restrictive measure that comes under the fishery management plan, we're just saying we're agreeing moving forward to that concept of improving the fisheries in the park, working with the Park Service. But any rules would come back to you before they would go forward.
And the EIS for the general management plan is on its own track, regardless of what we do today, and that process is.
Yes.
Well, it's important that we help the park with their mission. At the same time, we have reasonable access, and at the same time, protect the resource.
We need to balance access and sustainability.
Balance access.
Commissioner Pretty?
In the part of the park where the Park Service has the authority between the north and the south, do they actually set the fishing rules?
No, they defer to us to set the fishing regulations.
But they wouldn't have to.
No, not necessarily, but the reason why we entered into the MOU in the first place is that they're looking for uniform regulations throughout the park, so a user would not realize which one of those areas they were in. It would seem seamless as they move throughout the park.
Okay. I think one of the speakers, maybe it was Bonnie, asked, are we giving up any authority with what you're asking us to approve today? So the answer to that would be
no. All you're doing, as Nick mentioned, is you're just reaffirming that we're good with this goal, and we would be coming back to you with regulations to try to reach that goal in the future. So we're not giving up anything.
okay. And under the general management plan, there was a question about what the criteria for success was after the 3 years, and how do you decide if that 500 needs to go up or down? Is that something that's yet to be set out?
There are some specifics listed in the plan right now, but we're still working on the details of what that research and monitoring plan would look like. We have it pretty detailed so far, and if you want to hear more about that, we can bring John Hunt up and he can go into the specifics of that if you want to hear more.
I think that would be helpful. And the other, maybe this goes along with it, is, as another speaker brought up, the possibility of placing restrictions on the permits, like, if you don't use it, let somebody else take it over, or to somehow perhaps have the restrictions more restrictive than the other areas to try to help achieve, what their goal is.
So let me remark on the use it or lose it. That was something we had not thought of, and we can take that into consideration. Jessica and I were briefly talking about that, and there is probably some mechanism we could figure that out in terms of how we do the process through our licensing and SAL structure. And so that's something we can add to think about that. So the concept of the 500 permits, and Jessica used the term, this is very similar to our quota hunt concept that we do routinely in our wildlife management areas. And the intent there is to provide an opportunity for those people that go through our lottery process to have a special experience while also serving that conservation need. And so this is how we developed it. And as Jessica said, selection of the 500 was done through a process where we were able to use data generated by my staff and our colleagues at NOAA on the numbers of reef fish in these coral reef habitats. And the concept is to find that sweet spot, Commissioner Jablonski, as you say, that maximizes that experience while still actually doesn't deplete the fish in that area, but participates in a restoration process which meets the Park Service objective. And so with that concept, what we're putting in place in terms of monitoring, and it's a very, very early stage and there's no formal science plan yet, but it is an expansion of the effort of that type of underwater statistically based sampling so that we can truly monitor the change in the fish populations, not just of the sweetest snapper species that we're using to base this on, but all the groupers and the whole reef fish complex, including the parrotfish and all the others. And then be able to evaluate that relative to both inside this special recreation area and outside. And be able to evaluate that relative to how many of fish are these people that win the lottery this year or win the lottery next year harvest. So we have a good mechanism in place to do it. And there's been some initial conversation between us and the folks, the scientists in the park, to try to figure out how to begin that increase in monitoring this coming summer. And I have one more thing, because there's an essential component. If we go back to our discussions on the Tortugas, we talked about, when I spoke to you that day, I talked about monitoring and how the results of the monitoring. And I also talked to you about our sonic tagging work with the movement of the mutton snappers. And hopefully many of you remember that. And that mutton snapper movement information and some of the other research was that it had the ability to confirm why it worked like it did, not just what happened. And we're building that component into this research plan as well.
I'd like to make a motion.
Commissioner Bergeron?
I'd like to make a motion, we move forward with the plan. From what I'm understanding, all the details, regulations, restrictions, and all of that will be coming back in front of us. And I would hope that our staff can work with the Park Service to reach their goal and mission. It's important that we always consider the environment. You know, there is special places in the beautiful state of Florida that are important to give consideration. And I look forward that the Park Service would have the flexibility to understand the recreational activities that we can work out as well. And so I think we should move forward with the plan. And the details and the regulations will be coming back in front of us. And I'm sure our staff can work with the Park Service to come to a compromise that benefits the environment and have recreational activities too.
So to clarify, we have a motion for staff recommendation with the direction that Commissioner Bergeron has provided also with that staff recommendation. Is there a second?
A second. And also, as I understand it, this just gives us an opportunity to start the process to where we can involve the stakeholders, we can involve the National Park Service, we can involve other people who have an interest in this special and significant area, that we can move forward with a plan. We've got a lot of things will come before us and take place before there's a final adoption of any of the changes in the rules. This is just really the starting place, and I think that we're doing the right thing by moving forward with that.
And still a lot of opportunity for stakeholders to input. I also wanted to mention that, again, commending Nick and the staff work on this. Again, this was not easy to get to here. I mean, we were fighting a big battle on the marine reserves, and so this is somewhat of a compromise and some innovation, things that the Park Service has never done before, as a result of us pushing on that particular issue.
So for clarification, does this motion cover both plans? We're talking about the fisheries plan and the general management?
Yes,
okay.
It would cover both the fishery management plan and the general management plan.
And then it points out here, just, which gives me even more comfort, is that there's a record of decision that will be released, and once that is released, then we'll begin looking at proceeding with public workshops and rulemaking at that point.
And it's important that we have a good cooperative partnership, because when you look at the boundaries, we have certain authority, and the Park Service has certain authority over a certain area, that we work together for the best interest of the people of Florida.
With that, all those in favor of the motion as proposed, say aye. All those opposed, say nay. The motion passes. Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Jessica, everybody. Thank you, stakeholders. We are going to take up next the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council. We've got Martha Bateman up to do that. Good morning, Martha.
Good morning. So as everyone leaves the room, it's okay. Okay, so this is going to be an update from our last Gulf Council meeting that was in late October. So since since the last commission I was at in September in Pensacola, the red snapper quota for 2013 was increased from 8.46 million pounds up to 11 million pounds. And commissioners, back in September, you approved a 2013 supplemental recreational red snapper season for our Gulf state waters in anticipation of this quota increase. The season was held October 1st through 21st. And when the state season was set, we were anticipating a similar supplemental red snapper season for the recreational fishery in federal waters that was projected to be those same days. However, this supplemental season in federal waters ended up being 14 days because projected fishing effort was believed to be higher than originally anticipated, and because of continued uncertainties about recreational harvest estimates from the summer season. So just a reminder, we talked about this at the last meeting, but we got some preliminary landings estimates from NOAA Fisheries that suggest there was a drastic increase in recreational red snapper harvest during the summer season compared to previous years, particularly in our state and in Alabama. And NOAA Fisheries is still looking at these estimates and working to determine how these new MRIC procedures that were implemented earlier this year, how they play into this, these changes in numbers. And so the MRIC program actually held a workshop earlier this month with the Gulf states to discuss options for addressing red snapper recreational data collection issues, potentially as early as this upcoming season in 2014. Okay, some good news in the Gulf Council presentation. Just last week, the FWC was awarded a grant from the Gulf Environmental Benefit Fund through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to improve recreational reef fish harvest data collection in Florida. These improvements would enhance MRIC data collection for our reef fish species, including red snapper, And the goal of this proposal is to better define the population of offshore reef fish anglers for survey purposes using some kind of permit or registry system, which would follow the same principles being used by the Louisiana's Department of Wildlife and Fisheries to survey offshore anglers in their state. And so we'll come back to you at the February meeting with a more detailed proposal for what these data collection improvements are going to look like. But we just wanted to share that news with you today. So at the October council meeting, NOAA presented a range of estimates for the 2014 federal recreational red snapper season length. The federal season would begin June 1st and would be a continuous season that closes when the recreational quota is expected to be met. And NOAA is estimating that this season would range from 38 to 43 days, depending on whether states adopt consistent regulations in their state waters. So if the federal season would be 38 to 39 days if Florida kept the same 44-day season as we had this year in 2013, and Texas and Louisiana maintain their current state regulations. And if all states adopt regulations that are consistent with the federal red snapper regulations for the recreational fishery, the season would be about 42 or 43 days. NOAA also did provide to us that the 2014 season would be roughly 50% longer if the recreational red snapper bag limit was lowered from 2 to 1 fish per person per day in federal waters. So these estimates are preliminary and could change if the council decides to eliminate the 30B rule that requires federally permitted for-hire vessels to follow federal regulations in state waters. The federal season would probably be shortened, and it's unclear how much shorter that season would be. But NOAA is expected to announce some finalized dates for this 2014 season by the end of this year. And after we get this announcement, we'll return to you in February for some possible rulemaking for the recreational season in state waters. Okay, the council is still considering regional management as a possibility for the recreational red snapper fishery, and is going to continue discussing this issue. Final action could be taken as early as April of next year. And the council has yet to select a preferred alternative for state allocation percentages and determine how these state allocations might be reconsidered in future years. This continues to be a controversial issue because of the landing shift from towards the eastern Gulf of Mexico as the stock is rebuilt and expanded off of West Florida. And the uncertainty in the 2013 MRIP landings estimates has raised some additional questions that have complicated this issue and are really raising questions about the validity of some of our historical landings estimates that we had been basing the state allocations on, or proposed state allocations on. So under the council's preferred plan, each state would be allocated its own quota for recreational red snapper management. However, the council could also take a different approach and decide to split the Gulf into east and west regions instead of state by state. Public sentiment about regional management remains mixed. Some are excited about state control over seasons and bag limits in federal waters, but some feel that we need to have better data collection methods before regional management occurs. And some feel that the proposed plan does not provide enough control to states, since the states would still be required, or would be required to follow the Magnuson-Stevens Act, and NOAA would maintain some management, some aspects of management. Some for-hire captains also feel that regional management may not benefit them if their state chooses seasons or regulations that favor private anglers. So we are requesting direction from you on regional management and setting state-by-state allocations. So previously, the commission had indicated that a 38% state allocation was appropriate for Florida, but given some of the new MRIP data concerns, that may mean that state allocations should be reconsidered after some of these concerns are resolved. Okay, the council is continuing to look at some other additional options for the red snapper fishery, including sector reallocation. So sector reallocation under this proposal would shift allocation from the commercial sector to the recreational sector to stabilize or lengthen the recreational season. And the council is expected to direct staff to hold public hearings after the upcoming February council meeting. Final action could be taken as soon as April if that occurs. And we're requesting commission direction on any preferred options for reallocation, including any additional options that you would like to see the council to consider. So this table has the alternatives that the council is looking at now for reallocation, and it also shows the sector allocations that you would end up with based on the alternative, as well as an estimate of what the recreational season would be based on whether Florida, Texas, and Louisiana maintain the regulations they had in 2013, or if everybody has seasons that are compatible with the federal season. So the reallocation options include, and these estimates are assuming the current quota of 11 million pounds. So the reallocation options include shifting 3, 5, or 10% to the recreational sector, or additionally, the council has considered reallocating 75% or 100% of the quota increases, so anything we got in addition to 9.12 million pounds would go to the recreational sector under those alternatives. And so you can kind of see here our status quo. Right now, we have a 51% allocation to commercial, 49 to recreational. We're looking at a 38 to 39 day season if states remain inconsistent, 42 to 43 if we're compatible. And then from there, the allocation shift depending on what the options are. So one thing that you can take home from this graph is the estimates show that shifting allocation to the recreational sector gets you very modest gains in recreational season length. That's pretty obvious. Under the alternative 4, which is adding 10% to recreational, that's the most drastic change in allocation being considered here. And that would estimate to result in a 47 to 53 day recreational season if all states match federal rules, and 44 to 52 if Florida, Texas, and Louisiana keep their current state regulations. Okay. Another option for red snapper that the council is considering is sector separation. And this would entail dividing the recreational quota either among private anglers and federally permitted for hire boats, or among private anglers, the federally permitted charter industry, and the federally permitted headboat industry for red snapper quota management. This has been a very heated issue at the council. However, the council decided at its last meeting to consider a voluntary sector separation option that could allow for hire vessels to opt in or out of a separate quota or quotas, depending on how they set it up for red snapper management. Some see sector separation as a way to potentially increase predictability in the recreational red snapper fishery by allowing different management to be used for the for-hire industry, such as using intersector trading or days at sea. However, it's extremely difficult to estimate how sector separation would affect the number of fishing days allowed for either sector. Opponents of sector separation believe that sector separation would not address some of the issues in the red snapper fishery and see it as a first step towards catch shares for recreational. Another issue to consider is how sector separation may depend on the 30B rule to prevent federally permitted for-hire vessels from harvesting private recreational angler quota if federal waters are closed but state waters are open. So based on previous commission direction, we've opposed moving forward with sector separation. This item is in the early stages of development at the council, but staff is requesting additional commission direction on sector separation, and it's particularly on this voluntary option that would allow federally permitted for-hire vessels to opt in or out. So just to give you an update on where we are with 30B, the council is still considering removing it. That would remove that requirement that federally permitted for-hire vessels follow federal rules when they're fishing in state waters for refish. Final action is possible as soon as in February, and based on your past direction, we will continue to support this item. Okay. For red drum, there's been interest in opening harvest in federal waters of the Gulf. The council requested that the council's Science and Statistical Committee provide an acceptable biological catch for red drum, and this is a first step towards allowing harvest of red drum from federal waters. So the FWC has opposed opening in federal waters based on your past direction, and that this closure protects the spawning stock of Florida's state waters red drum fishery. So in summary, staff is requesting direction on 3 red snapper items in the Gulf: regional management, sector reallocation, and sector separation. For regional management, staff specifically requests direction regarding setting state allocation percentages. And previous commission direction was for a 38% allocation for Florida, but new MREP data concerns may mean that this percentage may be too low for Florida or just isn't right. For sector reallocation, staff is requesting direction on any preferred options, including any additional options that you may like to see the council consider. And based on previous commission direction, we've voted against moving forward with sector separation, but we welcome any additional commission direction on this issue, including whether to consider that voluntary option. And so any other input that you are willing to provide, we always welcome that. And our next council meeting will be February 3rd through 7th in Houston. And just a note that this is the week before the February commission meeting. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Martha. Commissioners, do we have any questions for Martha, or do we want to take public comment first? Jeff? All right, we'll do public comment first. Vice Chair Pretty.
We only have 2 speakers. Drew Martin would be first, followed by Roy Williams.
Drew Martin with the Sierra Club. I would just support the recommendations, and I support particularly the part about the reef fish. I think anything to do with the reefs, we need to absolutely make sure we have substantial protections. Our reefs are experiencing a great deal of damage right now. Thank you.
Mr. Williams.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Roy Williams. I'm a retired member of the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission staff. I retired in 2007. Prior to that, I spent 20 years as a representative to either the Gulf Council or the South Atlantic Federal Fishery Management Council. So I know the federal issues relatively well. I was pleased when the staff asked me either late last year or early this year if I would be interested in submitting my name for a Gulf Council appointment. I was honored, in fact, and I did. And surprisingly, I got on the governor's list. It was a list of 3, I think, and I got selected. So I'm here today. I'm a member of the Gulf Council now, but I've only been to 2 meetings since I've been back. I am here personally, though. I'm not representing the Gulf of Mexico. I'm here on behalf of myself. And I want to address some of the things that Martha has talked about here. You have 3 big issues that are going on right now with red snapper, and it's the most important issue in the Gulf. I'm sure you all know that. The first is the regional management. While I didn't like the concept of that when I first arrived, I now think it's the way to go, and I think I would urge us to try to figure out a way that we could come up with some regional management techniques. The states set their own regulations for fishing in the federal zone off of their regions, and I think that would go a long way to solve the problem. I don't think it's going to give us long recreational seasons, but it would greatly improve the management. Another issue is 30B, the repeal of 30B. I have indicated to Nick that I will support him. He personally made an appeal to me to support him on that, and I will do that. I wonder, though, that in the long run, whether it might not come back to haunt you. If 30B is repealed and you have all these professional charter boats now fishing in state waters, mostly in the northern Gulf of Mexico, they're probably going to be making 2 trips a day to target red snapper. What you're going to see is more fishing on red snapper. The state share is going to increase. It's going to be a greater overrun on federal quota. Higher fishing mortality is going to come right back into the next stock assessment. I suspect there'll be some consequences for that with lower catches in the federal zone the following year. Keep in mind also that 30B will help repealing 30B will help the panhandle fishermen. It's not going to do a thing for the fishermen off Tampa Bay. And red snapper are caught down there again. But they have very little or no access in the federal zone, in the state waters to red snapper. The one other thing that I want to talk about, the real reason I'm here, is I'd like you to allow Martha, for the purpose of scoping hearings, to support the issue of sector separation, that is partitioning the recreational fishery into both a private boat and a for-hire boat fishery. This has become real important. I don't know in the end how I'm going to vote on this myself. I don't know if we should partition it or not. And I see my time's up. If I could just have a few seconds to wrap up. I don't know if I'm going to support it in the end, but for purposes of public hearing, I think it is important to allow to go to the public and let them speak to this issue as to how they feel about partitioning these two fisheries. What's optimal for one is not necessarily optimal for the other. And I know that charter boats really feel stressed. These are all small businessmen that are trying to run businesses in a very short red snapper season, and they're looking for better ways to optimize their businesses. The Destin Charter Boat Association has endorsed as an association sector separation. At this stage, all we want is to go to public hearing, scoping hearings. There's no council decision yet to endorse this, but to be able to go to scoping hearings, to let the public speak to this issue, find out how they feel about it, and then come back and reconsider it. And I wish you would, as a commission, would endorse that and allow that to go forward. Thank you, and I apologize for going over my time. If there are any questions,
Thank you, Roy. Good to see you again.
You too.
We do have an additional speaker.
Thank you very much for your statement in regards to listening to the stakeholders and the small business people, and obviously the resource. That's important.
Thank you, sir.
Congratulations on your appointment.
There's some of the new, I mean, Roy was the previous guest for us for many years. So a familiar face. Thank you.
Trip Ochman is our additional speaker. And Trip, since Roy went over a little bit, I know you won't mind taking that out of your time, right?
Not at all. I'm usually pretty quick with this.
Did I see a hand? Excuse me,
Yes,
a
ma'am.
hand. Did you register, sir?
I just got here. I'm sorry I'm late.
If you would see, I think we need to give you a card to fill out, and we'll get you on the list. Thank you. Go ahead, Trip. Sorry.
I wasn't going to speak on this, but just as I saw the direction come up, just wanted to say that with regional management, CCA was very in favor of this on the outset. I'm sorry, but as things moved along, CCA kind of, I think the waters got a little muddy on the way things were going to go in that route, and we would ask that if we're going to move forward with that, that we're very cautious, or that you're very cautious with that being any direction to Martha. With sector reallocation, we are definitely looking into that and definitely in favor of sector reallocation. As of right now, we're looking at the 75-25, and any increase over the 9.1 million pounds. So 75% of that would go to recreational, 25% would go to commercial. With sector separation, CCA is adamantly opposed to that. We don't see that splitting recreational fishermen up would be a good thing for anybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trip.
And our final speaker, I think, is Terry Gibson.
Good morning. I'm sorry I got lost in this Weston spaghetti and couldn't find the entrance. But anyway, I operate, I'm speaking on behalf of my own charter business here, which is based in the South Atlantic. But I want to echo Roy's sentiments on sector separation specifically. You know, I don't know if I'll live long enough to ever have this conversation on the Atlantic side. But I've watched with great interest on the, about this debate on the Gulf side. And I have mixed feelings about the issue because on the one hand, I'm a private recreational angler and I don't want to see the pie get divided too finely. But on the other hand, I've got a charter business and sometimes the fishing is really slow. And sometimes the only thing we can catch are sea bass and Brazilian snapper, things with relatively small ACLs. And it'd be really nice to have, some sort of, reserve for the charter industry, especially when the fishing is really slow, or in the case of golf, where you've got so much competition for a finite resource. So I think it's only fair that to come out to let the public voice their concerns and their the good, the bad, and the ugly about the potentialities of sector separation. There's no reason not to just go on and air the issue out, and I hope that the commission will support the thorough scoping of the possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
And that was it, Mr.
That's it. Great. Martha, why don't we get you back up here? We've got, commissioners, 3 fairly significant issues in the Gulf that probably the best way to, none of them are simple and easy, cut and dry, which maybe they are. We'll find out. And maybe the best way to take them on, my understanding is we don't need to have a vote, but we do need a consensus among the commission, the direction we want to give Martha as our representative on the council. And so I guess what we're looking at first is this regional management plan. As my understanding is that, yeah, we'll get to the slide here.
Eventually.
Yeah.
I love slides. Okay.
And my understanding is that the challenge here, I think in the past we as a commission have sort of endorsed the concept overall. The devil's in the details, and the details are how much allocation each state gets. And my understanding is that Martha, that we're not terribly comfortable with the direction that that's going.
Yeah, so there's been a couple of issues with the allocation. So we thought we had maybe come close to where we were comfortable. And, you had endorsed the 38% idea. After that happened, first we got new numbers from MRIP. I guess the way that the headboat landings had been divided was wrong. And so that changed the picture for us, and it showed that Florida had actually been landing more. And then this MRIP issue came up where they changed the survey, which is not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, but it gives us a very blurry picture of what the catch history that we would be using to set these allocations, what that catch history actually is. There's a very real possibility that we've been underestimating landings in Florida for who knows how long, and we just don't know really what our landings look like for the past however many years.
And Nick wanted to talk about this for a moment too.
Sure.
Commissioners, our colleagues in Texas and Louisiana, this is really important to them, and we've been trying to work with them to find a way kind of out of this box we're in of trying to split the pie. And the thing, we weren't even able to kind of settle on everybody agreeing to that 38%. And now the thing we want to avoid is agreeing to a path forward and then find out we agreed to a much lower percentage of the pie than we should have. And then we've got everybody saying, what are you thinking? And so, but we want to work with our colleagues in the Gulf and other states. And then the carrot here is more flexibility in managing seasons and methods and such on a state-by-state basis. So it's more flexibility for the state, but also more responsibility for us to manage landings. And if we reach a certain quota point, we've got to shut down our season. So it comes with some heavy responsibility as well. We think there's promise in this idea, and I'm really trying to, and we're all working together to try to find a way out of the box of having to come up with some hard way to split the pie that could put any of us in a tough position with regard to our portion of that. So my thinking is, if you are comfortable, allow us to continue to work with our colleagues and explore this idea. And continue to kind of push for some innovative ways to get through this, and find out. But we would not agree to. And I've been making it very clear we would not agree to any. We'll take this percent or that percent without coming back to you. So that's kind of the place we're at. Does
that sound good with the commission?
Sounds good to me. One other question I had: could you go back to the council and asked if they could consider, the season opening Memorial Day weekend, which is about a week ahead of the June 1st, and see if they would consider doing that in the, with the federal water. And that may be something Mr. Williams would also want to address, but I think that would be an opportunity for us to, potentially help both commercial and recreational fishermen.
Are you thinking opening like Friday, Memorial Day weekend, or
I'm thinking
Saturday?
Saturday.
Saturday?
Saturday of Memorial Day weekend.
I can do that. I think it will be extremely tight and may not be possible for 2014 based on how the federal process works. We'd have to propose it in February. We would get a document in April. Even if we could approve it in April, which may be possible, I'm not sure that it could be done before Memorial Day weekend. But
we could ask.
Certainly, yes.
And that is something we could consider in state waters if we would decide to do that.
That's right. Commissioner Roberts is, I mean, his point's well taken. We were looking at consistency versus non-consistency. I mean, non-consistency this year is projected to only be a day, you know, in there. You know, we were 44 days. I don't know why maybe there aren't more than 44 days, you know, next year, you know, as we're looking into this. So as we get to that conversation that we were talking about, maybe we want to add some days, certainly doing, we've always done it on the back end or in the fall, doing it on the front end might be worth considering, especially given, again, the consistency, inconsistency delta is pretty small. There's room for us to maneuver. Okay, well, Nick and Martha have direction on the first issue. We just got some direction on this issue from Commissioner Roberts. If everybody's in concurrence, I think the issue is we're looking maybe for more days. I mean, this is a good news story. The red snapper story is a good news story, and so maybe we can consider looking at more days and putting them on the front end. Next issue, sector reallocation. Do you have a preferred alternative in the federal vernacular?
I think it seems like the alternatives that tap or I guess allocate more to the recreational by giving quota increases rather than taking from the overall pie seem to be a little bit more palatable to everyone. I mean, there are a lot of commercial folks that, of course, do not want reallocation and would like to continue with the 51-49 split. In my mind, if you're going to do it with the quota increases. So,
so don't touch the base allocation, just the increase.
Right.
I like option 5 to where you leave everything as it is up to the 9.12 million, and then you give it 75-25 beyond there. I do think the commercial side deserves some. Obviously, we think the recreational side, I wouldn't want to go to option 6. And I think what happens is then any increase in quota that we have, we've established a way to address that, but we leave kind of status quo that percentage up to the 9 million pounds.
Commissioner, is that good? Nick, did you want to?
No, that's. I'm glad you did that. We're we have great respect for our commercial folks and want to continue to see that be a vibrant industry. But with this new quota, there is an opportunity here with the importance of that recreational sector, the economic benefits of that red snapper season.
This with sector separation. This is probably the thorniest of the issues out here. There's a lot of there's, just speaking personally, there's some creativity and innovativeness here, and it's different. On the other hand, there's a lot of concern out there and angst, and I know when we've moved into these new and different management plans, we've kind of wanted to say, look, if there's a consensus out there or a strong majority to move in a certain direction, we'd be okay with it. If there's not, we've tended not to force it. We want the fishermen to kind of guide where we go here. So there's a little bit of balance here. Also, my understanding is as Roy was saying, this is just it's a stakeholder, there's a stakeholder process involved here. The question is, do you even go into the stakeholder process? That's, I guess, the issue for us to.
I think Commissioner Roberts is on a roll.
Well, I think we got to be real careful in sector separation. That I am concerned about what effect it would have on 30B. I think that's a rule that at least sector separation may impact that, and I think at the moment we just probably need to stay the course for what we're doing and maybe stay out of the sector separation.
May I just to clarify, the question I think is, do we support or stay neutral or just allow the public scoping piece to go forward without showing, hey, we're not? But I wanted to get clear on kind of what you're.
Well, and I would also say whatever we would decide on that, 30B ought to be gone. Period. I mean, it's so any concern about linkages and things. I think a clear message from the commission is we just want to see 30B out of here. Period.
Question from Martha: have
like it's been tabled a couple of times and brought back from the dead. Motions come up at meeting to meeting. Let's look at this as restoration. Let's look at that. We've generally voted against bringing it back from the dead, so to speak. But it's back, and we have this new option on the table, well, semi-new option, I guess. And it's looking like there will be a vote in February on whether to take this out to the public for the first time. It was about options, and it's not, a formal proposal. And so that input would go back to the council, and then the council would have to decide what, if anything, they want to do with that. And then they would draw, if they decided to move forward, they draw up their proposal or their various alternatives for a proposal, I guess. And then once they kind of settled on their options, then they would take them out to the public again with the formal options. And then the public would say, I like this option, I like that option, but I don't like this, and so on. So, and then the council could take final action. It's about a year-long process from start to finish.
Based upon that information, do you need some direction that we're neutral on it, we want more information, or we support it or oppose it? Do you need that direction today? I think it would be difficult for me to support it, but obviously we can get more information. I'm just concerned as to what direction you need.
Yeah, I mean, if you would like to get more taking this as scoping, but not necessarily committing to this in the end, I mean, we have plenty of time to change the course, I guess. We'll be back to you with more on this, don't worry, as with all things Red Snapper.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Millard, I think we all value public input, and it's difficult to sit up here and say no. We're against having more input from the public on any issue. However, I have some reservations about just further dividing the camps of fishermen, and I think that's a dangerous path to go down. And it may be that the council's going to go down that path anyway, but I'm not really sure that we need to be at the front of that and trying to give you direction. To go to your meeting and say, the SWC is leading the charge on. So my preference would be to remain neutral, let it play out at the council, and then if that's the path that the council decides to go down, then obviously we'll be a part of reviewing the public input. But I just think that this is a slippery slope that we're on, and then has the potential for, just creating more divisiveness between fishermen, and that concerns me. So.
The only question I have is, can you remain neutral
Yes.
at the council?
I can abstain.
As long as you don't have to make a decision one way or the other, then I'm fine with remaining neutral on it and gather additional information.
And as we all know, I mean, in our territory, we got folks all over the place on this. We just split up in the panhandle. So, I mean, it's an opportunity for them to weigh in with us, in the interim. And
I've always like to make my decisions after I hear from our stakeholders and the public. what is good for them, rather than us sitting up there trying to divide a resource and percentages. And I would say we're better off to let the process proceed and let the public have an opportunity. That's who we represent anyway, is the public and its stakeholders.
Well, I think, Martha, you have direction on the 4 big issues, 3, and then we gave you a little extra guidance
A little
on,
bonus for next
on,
time.
yeah, for thinking about on the season dates. Executive Director.
Well, and I think the guidance was clear on 30B as well. And again, I really do respect Roy's concerns about it. 30B has been a real challenge for us and really created issues for how we manage this. And our recommendation would be it'd be better not to have that in play. But we do need to be sober about it as far as there'll be some trade-offs because it'll be increased fishing effort in state waters if that goes away. We'll have to deal with that.
Good. Great. Thank you, Martha.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Good presentation. Next on the agenda, we have the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council with Jessica coming back up here. I don't think there's any direction needed on this particular item, and so all the commissioners have gone through the presentation, seen it, so I don't think we were going to have Jessica walk it through the presentation. If there's any special highlight you might want to give us, and then we were going to take public comment, and it looks like we only have one member of the public that wants to speak to this.
Yeah, I don't need to give the presentation. We don't need any direction today, and I can just respond to the public comment if you guys would like.
Great, thank you. Vice Chair?
Our only speaker that's registered is Drew Martin. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Appreciate it. Well, that is all for the South Atlantic Council. Wow. This is Jessica, you are good. All right. Well, that brings us to swordfish, which we heard yesterday. We had a presentation yesterday on swordfish, and we probably need to see if, before we vote on that, if there are members of the public that have wanted to speak on the swordfish issue. Our staff is taking a look at that. Is the meeting going well so far?
You do a good job. You know that?
Thank you.
But we don't want to hurt Dick's feelings.
No, we don't. He does a much better job than I do.
Mr. Chairman, no speakers.
So we have no speakers on swordfish. So we actually, we do need to vote on that particular item. And do we want to bring the staff recommendations up on that? Yeah, well, we have staff recommendations in our books. Again, we all got briefed on this at yesterday's meeting. We have no public comment on this. I would entertain a motion to move the staff recommendation.
I make a motion that we approve staff's recommendation.
Commissioner Bergeron makes the motion. Commissioner Pretty seconds. All in favor, aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The motion passes. So we're on to the venting issue. Similar to yesterday, we heard this briefing yesterday. And all we are waiting on is public comment, and we have no public comment on the venting issue. This is a freedom issue and a common sense issue. There was some.
I move for freedom.
We move for freedom. Freedom's a good thing. We're cutting fees. We're moving for freedom. So, amen. So I got Commissioner Vard has made the motion. Do we have a second? Commissioner Pretty seconds freedom. So all in favor of freedom, vote aye. Aye. All opposed.
Let the record reflect that Commissioner Roberts took a walk on freedom.
Show the motion passes on venting. All right, commissioners, we're going to have a little special presentation that wasn't on the agenda, and I'm going to turn it over to Nick, a good friend and partner of ours, has come into the room here, and we wanted to introduce him and give him a chance to talk. A gentleman who has a great partnership and with the FWC, so I'm going to turn it over to Nick.
Yeah, I'd like to call our friend Rick Murphy up today. Many of you have met Rick, and what he was in, we're in his neighborhood a little bit. Of course, he gets around; he's all over the place. But we are thrilled about partnership with Rick and the exposure we get on the Insider Florida Fishing Report and Sportsman's Adventure and the shows. he's a celebrity. I mean, it's true. I was with him at several events recently, and people are kind of, man, you know, they're showing him pictures of the fish they caught, and it's really cool that we have such a good partnership, and he's helping get the message out through his shows. And we thought it'd be a good opportunity to kind of give y'all a taste of what he does for us. And I've got a package I'm going to hand out, but I'm going to turn it over to you, Rick. And we're on the Florida channel, so don't let the cameras make you nervous.
Oh, why don't we go ahead and roll the DVD?
Hey, Rick, before the cameras come on, you need to comb your hair a little.
Okay. I shaved it and I cut my head.
I'm Captain Rick Murphy, and fishing throughout Florida, the fishing capital of the world, is my passion. And there's nothing more fun than landing a trophy Florida bass except releasing it. Florida Trophy Catch Program allows you to reward yourself for releasing a bass over 8 pounds. Register now and go to trophycatchflorida.com and sign up. Read the rules, be sure to have a camera, a scale, and a ruler in your boat. And just registering makes you eligible for a drawing for a Phoenix bass boat. The next time you catch a bass over 8 pounds in Florida, photograph it, release it, and get rewarded. And if there's a fish over 13 pounds, handle it like a rare jewel and call the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission to come certify it before you let it go. Reward yourself for releasing a bass over 8 pounds anywhere in Florida, and you'll be helping the FWC ensure Florida is the bass fishing capital of the world today and tomorrow. Chances are you spent a lot of time in the outdoors when you were growing up. Hours spent fishing, hunting, camping, hiking, or simply playing in the outdoors helped you get connected with nature. Sadly, today's children are disconnected from nature. They spend nearly 8 hours a day on their computers or watching TV while the number of kids hunting and fishing continues to decline. And that's why the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, together with the Wildlife Foundation of Florida, created the FYCCN, the Florida Youth Conservation Center Network, to encourage kids to participate in the outdoors. A statewide network of conservation centers, the FYCCN features wild outdoor centers offering deep woods experience that connects to near outdoor sites in the communities where kids live. You can help kids learn to love the outdoors and become stewards of our precious outdoor heritage. You can help us create the next generation that cares. Go to fyccn.org to learn more. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission wants your help in removing lionfish from Florida waters. Interested in helping? Lionfish can be speared or caught in handheld nets, and a recreational fishing license is not required while targeting lionfish while using a pole spear, a Hawaiian sling, or handheld net, or a spearing device that is especially designed and marketed exclusively for lionfish. If you get stung, treat the wound by immersing the area in hot water for 30 to 90 minutes and seek medical attention as soon as possible. Although complete eradication is not likely to given the current range and distribution of the species, localized control is possible through consistent and sustained harvest pressure. To learn more about lionfish evasion and what you can do to help, visit myfwc.com/wildlife habitats and click on non-native species.
So anyway, commissioners, what we thought we would do is I went up and I spoke to Nick, and we've got a lot of new faces, and I thought it would be really good for us to have just a short conversation about how this whole relationship started. So 13 years ago, and these are examples of what we've done. These actual conservation minutes have been running for the last 12 months. And 13 years ago, we started this relationship, and it was with Rodney Barretto's vision. There was a grant that was earmarked to promote fishing through a media buy. So somebody at the FWC thought about taking this money and going and buying cameras and editing equipment and starting your all own show, and Rodney, said, well, listen, we already have somebody that would probably be a good fit, a guy who shoots a lot of shows here in Florida. He's a steward of the Everglades and so on. So we were able to take that money that was basically would have been spent in the first year and spread it out over 5 years. And that's kind of how the relationship started. During this 13-year process or this partnership, we fished with Governor Bush, we fished with Governor Chris, shot a show with Governor Chris, and also with Governor Rick Scott. We also were real fortunate to do a bunch of shows with a bunch of the different commissioners and the different regions. Like we shot a red snapper show in the Panhandle. We shot a show with red snappers and groupers and beeliner snappers in Jacksonville. We were also able to do a show fishing the wrecks in the Southwest, catching groupers, Goliath groupers, cobias, and permit. And then the other show we've done recently that's been airing for the last year is we did a bass show with Alligator Ron Bergeron, who wants to change his name to Bassman Alligator Ron Bergeron. And that particular show has aired 22 times in the last 12 months. So we believe through our viewership of Sportsman's Adventures and the Chevy Florida Fishing Report that it's really important for our audience to understand how diverse that the fishing really is here in Florida. And that's the reason why back 13 years ago, Rodney's vision was to name the Florida the fishing capital of the world, and that's when that all started with Governor Bush. So in the last 13 years, I want to give you some data here. We have aired 2,865 second billboards promoting the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. We have shot 55 conservation minutes and commercials and shot them and produced them for you. If you were to go out outside and try to get those things produced, they would cost you probably $15,000 to $20,000 per piece. We've also aired.
So you're saving taxpayer dollars.
Absolutely, that's what I'm about. I've been working for minimum wage for
Work the
13
theme
years.
today. Work the theme.
And then we've also aired 2,782 commercials on sports or conservation minutes on Sportsman's Adventures or the Chevy Florida Insider Fishing Report. Now, in 2012 and 2013, the first quarter of 2013, these billboards and conservation minutes aired 442 times on 4 different networks. They aired on Sun Sports, they aired on Fox Sports South, the Pursuit Channel, which is a national channel, as well as Destination America, which is owned and operated by the Discovery Network. And according to the Nielsen ratings, we've had 112,602,386 actual TVs measured watching these conservation minutes, commercials, and content. And through our partnership with Sportsman's Adventures and the Chevy Florida Insider Fishing Report, viewers now understand why Florida has the most licensed anglers and also is #1 in most registered boats. And so it's just truly proved that in all categories that we really are the fishing capital of the world. Some of the other common partnerships that we have is certainly we have Yamaha Outboards, which is our sponsor, as well as you guys have Yamahas on a lot of your officers' boats. You have Pathfinder boats as well as Contender boats and Chevy trucks. And I'm proud to say that through the bid process, your FWC officers are now able to rely on those boats and trucks to have a safe return home after a day out on the water. So in closing, we appreciate the FWC staff and the commission in having the confidence to relay and share all the messages over those years and the many interests that you guys have had. Thank you.
Awesome. Rick, you were the man. We really appreciate it. I've known Rick for years and years, and always look forward to seeing him. And Rick was with us when Governor Scott was fishing up in St. Andrews Bay and caught something like 23 redfish in St. Andrews Bay with the fishing with the cabinet, which was a great day. But you really do. I mean, you provide the ultimate public service for us, and your shows are. I love watching your shows. I mean, I watch the Sun Channel, yeah, second only to. I mean, I watch them, but I also watch them because they show the Gators losing, you know, as repeats, and so it's second only to those shows. Yours are number one on the network in my book.
Well, thank you. And there's just a lot of new faces, so I thought maybe we might want to open that up to, you know, Commissioner Roberts and Commissioner Purdy.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, what commissioner did you take fishing off of Southwest Florida? Because that's where I lived, and it wasn't me.
Well, that was a little before your time, but it doesn't mean that we can't do it in the future, for sure. It was, you know, Commissioner Barreto, boy, he kept a tight chain on me there for a while.
Well, Rick, it's a new day. Every commissioner wants a little piece of you now.
Hey, Rick, I want to thank you for everything you do. I want to thank you for your support to the Blue Green event the other night. Every time we have an event, Rick's there in support of it. What you're doing here is absolutely fantastic. I get so many comments from all the sportsmen that actually watch all of this. And thank you for the trip I took with you. I know it took you 2 years to get me to go, but it was absolutely gorgeous. And I do want to apologize for catching more fish than you did.
It's okay. I just thought maybe you were going to apologize the day that I came to make sure that you were going to show up for the thing. Well, we won't talk about your attire at your office.
No, we won't talk about that. But also, Rick, we brought in and went into the Everglades too, so we could highlight the beauty of the Everglades, the importance, and it was a great show because it actually showed what great fishing we've got in the Florida Everglades, you know, for future generations and fathers to take their children out. And, you do a great job. Happy to be your friend, and great job for us, believe me.
Well, I'm looking forward to, you know, working with all the other new commissioners and, you know, allowing them to enjoy it the way we get to do it. So it's going to be fun.
Absolutely. You know, I caught the first fish. Then I caught the biggest fish. Then I caught the most fish. And see, I thought I was going with someone who's going to teach me how to fish.
It does suggest he's a good guide.
Yeah, great guy.
And a very generous host.
I was going to say, humble enough to air it, 20-some times.
As Rick goes, I do want to say, commissioners, one thing he's done really good is getting commissioners engaged in some of these. In some of the shows, we've had commissioners actually join him as a, you know, special guest and helping tell a story about things we're doing. And in outings, get you guys involved. And I would encourage you, if y'all can help connect with Rick, I know you can share information, but I encourage you to take advantage. Some of you may or may not want to be on camera. If you do, Rick can help you get there, and it'd be good. We like to see you guys out there. So thank you, Rick, for all you do.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Next up on the agenda, and this is our last issue-based item that we have on the agenda before we get to public comment and commissioner speech, is we have a sea cucumber briefing that we're going to move forward with. Come on up. We got Melissa Rex.
Good morning. Still morning. Okay, great. Commissioners, this presentation is a proposed draft rule that would create a commercial trip limit for sea cucumbers, which are managed as part of your marine life rule. In the interest of time, I'm going to be presenting a shortened version of this presentation, but you have the entire thing in your briefing booklets, and it's available in the back for the public. Sea cucumbers are sedentary invertebrates that are an important part of a variety of Florida's marine ecosystems. And although you might not think about sea cucumbers and overfishing in the same sentence, they are actually vulnerable to overfishing, mostly because they're visible and they're sedentary, which makes them easy to catch, and because their spawning behavior requires relatively dense populations in order for them to be successful reproducers. Currently, there is a small fishery for sea cucumbers in Florida, primarily in the Florida Keys, and this fishery has traditionally targeted them only for sale to the aquarium trade. However, they are commonly targeted elsewhere in the world as a food fishery because of their nutritional and medicinal qualities, and their high value in the Asian markets. An exporter has recently established a processing facility in the Keys, which led members of the commercial fishing industry to become concerned that potential unsustainable expansion of that fishery could occur. As I mentioned, sea cucumbers are regulated under the marine life rule, with other species that are traditionally targeted for the aquarium trade. FWC regulations require that all marine life species be transported and landed alive, and we have fairly strict recreational bag limits in place for all those species. The commercial fishery is a limited entry program, and in addition to the saltwater products license, the fishermen are required to hold both an RS and a marine life endorsement. However, the marine life endorsement holders are not subject to a trip limit for sea cucumbers in particular, which brings us to the purpose of this proposed rule. Most of the sea cucumber fisheries that have developed around the world to support the nutritional and medicinal markets in Asia have resulted in boom and bust fisheries. You can see that the FAO, the food, which is an organization associated with the UN, has deemed 72% of the international fisheries to be either overexploited or fully depleted. And extinctions of some of these species locally and population collapses have been reported from several locations, including high-profile conservation sites such as the Great Barrier Reef and the Galapagos Island National Park. Florida's sea cucumber fishery is small. However, members of the fishery have expressed concern that a potential rapid expansion of that fishery to support the developing local market could result in a boom and bust fishery and population collapses here in Florida. Based on these concerns, staff committed at the June 2012 Commission meeting to monitor this fishery and to work with the industry if expansion developed. In the first half of 2013, the landings have more than tripled the previous annual average. A commercial trip limit would be a proactive measure to prevent potential overexploitation of this natural resource and an important ecosystem component here in Florida. The proposed draft rule would establish a daily commercial trip limit of 200 individual sea cucumbers per person per day and a daily vessel limit of 200 sea cucumbers, regardless of how many licensed harvesters are on board. This limit would be a total limit inclusive of all sea cucumber species. Staff has also received a letter of support for this proposed limit from the Florida Marine Life Association, which is the official industry organization that represents our commercial marine life endorsement holders. The proposed rule would be a proactive measure to ensure that the food fishery, if it does continue to develop, does not expand beyond what the resource can sustain. So staff recommends approving the proposed draft rule, establishing both a daily commercial trip limit of 200 individuals per person and a daily vessel limit of 200 sea cucumbers, regardless of how many harvesters are on board. If approved and directed, staff recommends returning for a final public hearing at the February 2014 Commission meeting. And that concludes my presentation.
Great, thank you, Melissa. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on sea cucumbers?
Yes, we do.
All right.
We have two. Drew Martin is the first one, followed by Jeff Turner. Jeff, if you come up to the front row. Okay, thank you.
Drew Martin, I'm here on behalf of the Sierra Club. We very strongly support this recommendation by staff, and China is really has this voracious market, and they're causing a lot of destruction around the world. We're seeing this particularly with the rhino, tigers, and elephants in Africa. There's no sense, sadly, of any morality in this market. They just take everything. And I think that everything is so important to the environment, and the sea cucumber is important to the environment. And if this is allowed to take place, then you're going to see extinctions, as you see in other areas of the world where this has happened, because it's so easy. And it's particularly unfortunate when any species is harvested in the spawning process, because that doubles the impact of the taking. Not only are you taking a species out of the environment, but you're taking it when it's spawning so that it would be able to create more of itself. So we really support this recommendation, and we hope you will approve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew.
Jeff Turner.
Jeff Turner, I'm here as president of the Florida Marine Life Association. We recently had a meeting and discussed this issue with sea cucumbers, and we wholeheartedly endorse staff's recommendation on this rule. And it's been great working with Melissa and Jessica and Mason as well.
to figure out and identify how this whole thing transpired and came about. Our fishery as an entire organization and everybody involved with marine life fishery is all about collection of live animals for the aquarium trade, not actually collection of the food fish item for export to another country. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to help with that. But I also think one more thing is that the staff is also going to potentially create a new chip ticket code that will help to identify if somebody is collecting these to go for the food fish industry, that it would check off on the box. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Commissioners, at this time, unless there are any questions or comments from you, I'd entertain a motion that would move staff recommendation that would establish a commercial daily trip limit and a vessel limit of 200 individual sea cucumbers. Do I have a motion?
So moved, but I think we should have been provided with some samples.
Commissioner Pretty moves staff recommendation. Commissioner Roberts second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Good job, Melissa. Well, we are getting close to the end of the meeting, surprisingly, and this is the time that we hear from members of the public that have registered to speak on items that weren't actually on our agenda. So I want to turn that over to the vice chair, and I think we have 5 or 6 members who wanted to.
I have 6 names. First 3, if you come forward, please, up to the front. Our first speaker is Drew Martin. Second, Bill Kelly, followed by Melvin Rosen.
Drew Martin, on behalf of Sierra Club, I want to first thank you for your cordial hospitality and your willingness to listen to us, and we appreciate that very much. Appreciate all the hard work the FWC does. I just want to talk a little bit about the reefs, because we spend a lot of time at these meetings talking about the recreational anglers, but there's a lot of people using the reefs that are not taking from the reefs, but they're providing a lot to the economy of Florida. And these are people who are divers and snorkelers, and I do a lot of snorkeling myself. So I think it's important when we talk about the users of the system that we include those people. And one thing that has really been people who like to view wildlife is we don't take anything out of the system when we're there, you know, unless people use them properly or touch the reef or something. But ideally, if they're following the rules, they're bringing a benefit, but they're not taking anything out. So, you know, we want to see the fish and the other creatures there to be viewed. And so it's really important to us that we don't take too many fish out of the system. And people who historically have lived in Florida tell me that, you know, the reef system had a lot more fish than it has today. And this is true around the world. Now, other things are impacting the reefs, including water quality. And when you talked about the Everglades yesterday, that's something we need to really think about, because if water is not being maintained properly or handled properly, and that runoff is getting out into the oceans, that's really damaging. And we saw, what have we seen, 700 manatees die because of water quality problems. And, you know, we're seeing dolphin deaths all up and down the South Atlantic right now. And I'm sure it's going to turn out to be attributed to some sort of water quality problem. So that's something that I think is important for you to be aware of, even though that's not part of your purview. The other thing is there's wildlife issues happening around the world. I don't know if Fish and Wildlife can have any impact on this, but I mean, there's real devastation going on right now in Africa with the poaching of rhinos and elephants. I don't know if you have any impact on when you monitor importation or if that's done by the federal government, but I hope that's something that everyone's aware of, because to lose these species to future generations will be a true tragedy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Drew.
Our next speaker is Bill Kelly, and he'll be followed by Ted Forsgren. He's not here. Ted? And he'll be followed by TJ Marshall.
I haven't said much this meeting so far. I just want to make 2 points. Number one, on all the federal issues that are going on, the question of allocation of how much fish goes to who is something that's been argued for the 27 years that I've been involved in this. We attempted to get that done when they were coming up with the catch share for grouper. There was a very interesting debate between Commissioner Yabronsky and Commissioner Wright. There was a letter written that said don't implement a grouper catch share until you got the allocation in place. Didn't happen. So now we have grouper catch shares on the different places. The problem comes when you try to move something out of one side to the other. Has to be a basis for what you do. There's been much data that's come forth to talk about the value of the fish allocated to the recreational fishery. The problem we're having with the red snapper fishery is that there's so many fish now, you can catch them very easily, and the more you catch, the quicker your fishery closes. So as the fishery increases in size, your season shrinks to the point where now you got so many fish, you catch the fish every time, and they're bigger. So each year your time frame gets shorter. So that's something that has to be addressed. Y'all are on the edge of it. You've seen the different stuff. Again, you know, we think that Florida does a better job of managing fish than the other one. The other thing I want to mention, without going into any great detail, but the recent ruling from Judge Fulford on gill nets. We want to compliment the commission staff, in particular, Bud Billhauer, and the work that's being done by John Blogow, who's been involved in virtually every one of those lawsuits for the last 17 years. It's a big thing. That one measure, or a group of measures that's contained in that constitutional amendment has caused tremendous improvements all around the state of Florida. And there's no doubt in that. You can look at all the stuff before and after. We are going to be actively involved with you and the Attorney General's office through this whole process, like we have in all the others. We've already hired an attorney, Fred McCormick, to be involved. He's filed to be in to do an amicus brief, and he's been accepted. So we're now all a part of the legal thing that's going on. So we just want y'all to be patient. The one thing I know for sure, there's been some rumors around about, you know, the commercial fishermen wanting to do mediation, wanting to come up with a settlement. And we've heard that that settlement is just give us a 3-inch mesh net and we'll be okay. Sorry, that's not a settlement. That's just a, you know, as one of the more prominent commissioners once said, you know, you can't look at a dog and call it a cat. It's a gill net. And so we're going to be there fighting the whole way. So we know who that prominent commissioner was. So anyway, thank y'all very much. Appreciate it.
We did have one additional speaker after TJ, and that's Manly Fuller. So TJ, you're up.
Hi, TJ. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Drove through a blinding rainstorm down from Cocoa Beach to get here, and y'all switched up the schedule on me. So I'm going to kind of quickly touch on, I know from what I've heard, you touched on regional management already with the Gulf Council, but I've been working this up through the chain of command, you know, within the agency, and my bigger concern is the other lawsuit that's out there right now, and that's in the Gulf red snapper fishery. A large group of commercial fishermen have filed suit that because of the recreational overages, it has limited the amount that the fishery has grown and they have lost quota. And that means if they win, NIMS will be court ordered to institute accountability measures in the red snapper fishery, which means right now there is no payback. Like I think 2 years ago, recreational went over by almost 1.5 million pounds. If that lawsuit wins, that means NIMS will be court ordered to make 1.5 million pounds paid back in the next year. And, you know, I've been, again, working through the chain of command, and we can all figure out what's going to be the series of events that's going to go on there, is that the states will say, a 5-day season, forget it. We're going to open up our state waters. And that's going to exacerbate the situation. And that means there's going to be an overage. And then in the following year, there will be 0 federal season. So what I'm asking of you, and this is what I've been asking of Nick, is please give your staff the room to negotiate with the other states on regional management. You know, your staff did a phenomenal job with the NIFWIP grant you just got. $3.5 million, which I understand may be even bigger over the next couple of years, where they'll be collecting fishery independent data and they'll be getting more precise catch estimates with recreational fishermen. It's kind of like what Louisiana has done, where they have, spent a ton of money to get really precise with what the recreational anglers are catching. It costs a lot, and your staff has gone out there and gotten that money for you to do it. But if we don't get serious and we don't give them the room to negotiate with the other states on what our quota would be in Florida under regional management, there's a train wreck ahead. And regional management, in my opinion, is the way to avoid that train wreck. I will be up in Panama City talking with Matt on December 3rd and 4th. If I could get with you, Bo, I know this affects your region really hard, and I know it does the same. And I'm being as sincere as I can that I wish I had gotten here for the Gulf Council portion, but this is a really big deal. I mean, my behind-the-scenes conversations with people within the NIMS law office is this lawsuit has a lot of merit. They're going to defend themselves as best they can, but this lawsuit has a ton of merit, and the likelihood of it winning, in my personal opinion, is very high. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, TJ. And I think the direction, we gave Nick the flexibility and staff direction on that issue.
Manly Fuller, Florida Wildlife Federation. I would like to just indicate that the Florida Wildlife Federation's position regarding nets is identical to what CCA and Ted just expressed to you all, and that we anticipate also filing legal actions in support of the Commission's position to defend the amendment and your implementation of that. We anticipate filing the next time the Attorney General files, and we appreciate the work of Bud and the rest of your staff and John Blogow, who's worked very hard on this over many years. This helps. The benefits of the net amendment are large. We think that the forage fish of Florida are critical to that are affected by the netting issue, and also that their forage fish are one element that's affected by the nets. But we think that forage fish conservation is going to be an emerging subject over the next few years because of their benefits to feeding the popular game fish and a lot of the commercial fish, and also they're important for wildlife like birds. And Audubon today, I think, is issuing a report about Florida forage fish, which I'm sure they'll be sharing with you. But we attended a very good workshop recently on forage fish conservation at the IGFA. We are also co-plaintiffs, co-interveners in legislation regarding the Big Cypress addition lands, and are contemplating possibly entering another case on that to guarantee responsible and sustainable use in that area, and that's as well as protect the natural resources. And then I'd like to say Nick plays a critical role in the Restore Act and an advisor to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. One thing we want to see is where there's opportunities to conserve watersheds feeding into the Gulf of Mexico through innovative land conservation techniques like purchasing of conservation easements to help protect watersheds and watersheds feeding into the Gulf. We want to see those considered as well. And that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Manley. Good update. Appreciate your work. Is that it? Did we? Were there any other members of the public that we didn't get to that wanted to speak? Seeing none, we are in Commissioner Exchange, bringing this in for a landing. I'll start on the ends. How about Commissioner Rivard? Any words of wisdom?
Mr. Chairman, you did an excellent job running the meeting.
Got a whole day left ahead of you.
And that concludes my comments. Thank you all.
Thank you, Commissioner Barr. Commissioner Roberts?
Well, I just want to be sure that Commissioner Rivard understands I left so that he would be able to take the lead in voting on the bending tool. I didn't want to take all of the glory from him today since I was.
Actually, Commissioner Bergeron did a lot of venting yesterday.
We did a lot of bending yesterday without a tool. He had a lot of tools, but he was actually looking for some tools yesterday, if I recall. I just want to say I really do appreciate Commissioner Bergeron and what you bring to the commission with your passion and your knowledge and your dedication to the Everglades. It's obviously it's a big challenge that we face. It would seem so simple for us to make decisions that would alleviate some of those problems, but as you looked at all the agencies involved yesterday, bureaucracy sometimes can be very difficult, and it seems like a process that could certainly be improved. But thank you for working so hard to at least be the leader in protecting the Everglades and what it means to Florida. Also, I'd like to thank the staff. As always, they do a great job to provide us information that we need. You do a lot of the legwork for us so that we don't have any challenges, with the exception of the Everglades, whenever we get here. And we have a commission that's going to take care of all of that for us. And I'd like to thank the other commissioners for your leadership. It's always interesting at every meeting how some of the agenda items develop and the roles that are played by all the commissioners. So thank you for that, and for the stakeholders for taking the time to come to the meetings and giving your input and giving us the information you need. I do think that it's very, very important that we have that we have the communication from the stakeholders so that we can take that information when we're making decisions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Roberts. Commissioner Pretty.
Yeah, I'd have to say that the highlight has to be the Everglades discussion that we had yesterday. And it's almost like, with all the federal agencies involved, it's like the poster child for bureaucracy. Too bad they can't also handle Obamacare, and then it'd be like the perfect storm. But I do appreciate Commissioner Bergeron's efforts. It's just got to be incredibly time consuming to deal with all those folks, not just the ones that were here, but all the other ones I know that you've got to deal with also. And, with all the time that's left today, I don't know why we didn't put some more things on the agenda, Eric, we drove all this way, and but thanks to all the staff and your efforts, all the time that it puts, that it takes to put this together, and then when we get here for the meeting and it just kind of goes off like clockwork, like it was just simple, and we know that's not the case. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Bergeron, our host.
Great meeting. I basically want to thank all my fellow commissioners for being so patient with me yesterday. But it is a major issue. It's one of the natural wonders of the world, and one of the largest restorations in the history of the world. Thank you for your trust for me to proceed as your point commissioner with all our federal partners and all of our sister agencies in the state of Florida. It's a very complex. I want to thank Nick for the extra staff, because the Central Everglades, which is 700,000 acres of the Everglades, which incorporates about 69 endangered species, and all of our native wildlife and ecology and environment is on the forefront like a wild train. And I want to thank all the staff and Eric and Chuck and everybody that participated in position paper. And the important thing is that we fortunately, the agency going back to 1943 had so much science-based, with scientists and biologists over 6 decades that we had information to put together the proper operation of water levels that are compatible with the environment, ecology, all of our wildlife and all of our endangered species. And that's the important thing, that we're able to establish that operational water level. We can save the Everglades. We actually can save the environment. That's what Everglades restoration is all about. And we can provide water to people as long as the water levels are compatible with the environment. And we can provide flood control as well. So I look forward to continuing to work on that. Want to thank all the stakeholders. You know, it's just so wonderful that we get all the input from all of our stakeholders to where we can make good decisions on all the major issues that come in front of us. I want to thank our governor again for his vision on the Everglades and all of his funding various programs. One of them was $980 million over, I think it's a 10-year span towards Everglades restoration, and an additional $90 million on the Tamiami Trail. And, you know, I think that's about it for me. It's been a wonderful thing working with all the commissioners, and even you, Nick. It's been great working with you. I want to thank Chuck Collins because, like I've said, I call Chuck sometime at midnight, you know, and he's 24/7. So, and Eric, I really appreciate everything that you participated with this whole team, and thank you for all your support. Thank all the stakeholders. God bless everybody. Long live the Everglades.
Thank you, Commissioner Berger. I think my takeaway from the last 2 days is you always forget until you get down here how much natural resource policy is intertwined with the 2 big national parks that we have in South Florida. I mean, here today we were dealing directly with Biscayne National Park. Yesterday, while we were talking about areas outside the park, it was the park influencing those areas and that area 3, and it just is it's a great complication, and I commend you, Commissioner Berger, on it. It's not something we have to deal with in other parts of the state. We deal with other state agencies for the most part, but when you're dealing with the Park Service, and you know, you kind of watch. There's a lot of moving parts. You can see folks getting caught around the axles of process and bureaucracy, and every so often just a good dose of homespun wisdom and common sense is what's needed to this process. And Commissioner Bergeron, you bring that in multiples. So we really appreciate it. And that played out yesterday in front of us, and it was wonderful to see, and Commissioner Pretty helping you out.
Yeah, I want to thank Commissioner Pretty because I remember when she said, "Will you answer Commissioner Bergeron's question before I start?" And kind of looked like the firing squad out there, but we're gonna. You got to have good leadership skills to form a consensus amongst many agencies, and we're going to do that. We're going to make it happen.
I want to thank Chuck and his team again with all the logistics down here and the hospitality. So I know there's a lot of work, a lot of folks behind the scenes to get these meetings in place. And also want to thank the Florida Channel, Avery and his crew here. We really appreciate it. Love your support and keep it up. We'll try to keep it interesting going forward for you guys. So our next meeting is in Tampa in February, which means everybody have a great Thanksgiving and a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. And we'll see you in February, and the meeting is adjourned.
Right.
tomorrow?
I know I did.